and I left. Therefore, I'm not on any Epstein list, any of those other lists. I avoided the compromise. Washington, D.C. is about sexual compromise, 100%. And if you work in Washington, D.C., you've been sexually compromised. Every single one of them has been sexually compromised. That's a promise. That's a guarantee, because I was there and I watch how it happens. They can pretend that it hasn't. They can deny it. Somebody somewhere's got videotape and photographs of them in a sexually compromised position. It may not be illegal, but if you're somebody who says, I'm happily married, I love my wife, I love my children, and suddenly they have a videotape of you and three nubile college co-eds going at it like nobody's ever gone at it before in life, suddenly your marriage isn't as important as you thought it was, is it? You don't want that imagery out there unless you're somebody who doesn't care, and then you ask for additional copies and you become an OnlyFans, open up your OnlyFans page. But I'm not in the OnlyFans business, so I avoided having those videotapes made. But they're there. It's real. And I believe that the Israelis run this, and they do it to control Washington, D.C., and they have effective control over Washington, D.C., and I think that's reflected in the policies of the Trump administration. Somebody asked the question, who do you think's really pulling the strings? It's Israel. Israel, Israel, Israel. And I apologize if I'm offending you, Gloria, or you, Jeremy. It's just my take on it. We don't need to go much further because I don't want the YouTube channel brought down over charges of anti-Semitism. I'm not anti-Semitic, just so people understand. I'm probably one of the few people that can say that, during the Gulf War, my job was to prevent missiles from landing on Israel. So anybody who calls me anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, you have no idea what you're talking about. Myself and other people put our lives on the line to stop missiles from landing against Israel. As a weapons inspector from 1994 to 1998, I traveled to Israel repeatedly. Why? Because I approached the Israeli government and said the only way you'll ever be secure, because, again, just to back it up, when the Gulf War ended, the decision was made in the Israeli government that the only way that they could preserve peace was to assassinate Saddam Hussein. And they began a plan to do just that. In 1993, October 1993, or early November 1993, Sariyat Matkal, their special forces, their Delta Force, was carrying out an exercise, actually on the soil of Gaza, because they had a strip where they actually did their work. And it went bad. And they killed a bunch of Sariyat Matkal, and it got exposed, and they had to cancel it. But they went into planning and said, how can we kill? We have to kill this guy. We have to kill Saddam. That's the only way to resolve it. 1994, a year later, I traveled to Israel, and I met with Yuri Sagai, the man who built the assassination plan. I said, Yuri, that's not the solution. The solution is me. The solution is the UN weapons inspectors. You're sitting on intelligence information about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program. If we find Iraq to be in compliance, you're going to slide that information under the doors of policymakers around the world, undermining my work. I need you to give me that information, and I need you to trust me to investigate this information. I need you to trust me that I'm going to go into Iraq and I'm going to do a really damn good job of following through, so I can come back to you and tell you either your information's right or wrong and how we've resolved it. It's the only way out of this. When I first gave that pitch to Yuri Sagai, his jaw dropped. I mean, they had to call timeout and actually leave because they didn't understand what the hell was happening.
I have a quote from Professor Michelle Chudovsky from Global Research. Israel is an instrument of the Pentagon. Netanyahu is a proxy. Israel does not act without the consent of U.S. NATO. And from what I understand, which is pretty limited compared to you, is that there seems to be this money laundering situation that goes on. We give money to Israel. When I say we, the United States gives money to Israel. Israel then turns around and funds Congress and Senate and various programs that oversee us, the United States, and then it kind of goes back. So it's kind of this circle. And, with the situation in Gaza, the United States is supplying money and weapons, but yet the protesters are pointed at Israel and Netanyahu and saying, stop doing this, but they're not looking at the United States and say, stop funding this. So it seems like, kind of like a circular relationship.
Well,
what
it
are
is
your
a
thoughts?
circular relationship. I mean, there's no doubt that it's a circular relationship, but it's not one where, okay, now we're getting into layers of complexity. It's too simple to say Israel controls the United States. That's too simple. What is more accurate, and is going to get me in more trouble, is to say that there is an element in American Christian Zionists and American Jewry, not Jews. I'm not saying Jews. I'm saying Americans who are Jewish, who believe in Zionist, using Zionism. Let me back this up. You guys do know that when Theodore Herzl was looking at, getting a homeland for the Jewish people, that in addition to Palestine, they had a plan B, and that was Patagonia. This is a statement of fact. They were looking at Argentina. So any notion that Israel is biblical in nature, that this whole Zionist enterprise is about the biblical legacy, that's just made up crap that came afterwards. It's about finding a plot of land where the Zionists can do their business. Israel is a tool used by certain power structures in the United States to empower themselves, to make themselves more powerful.
That's how I understand it. Thank you.
But those power structures use Zionism, both in terms of the purest Jewish application of it, Greater Israel, but also Christian Zionism. They exploit the end of days, rapture, Armageddon aspect of it. But it's an empowerment vehicle here in the United States of people to empower themselves. So, but that's outside the framework of the Pentagon. I mean, it's not right to say the Pentagon does. The Pentagon is run by generals and civilians who are temporary political appointees. What we're talking about here is a deep state. We're talking about here is a permanent establishment of unelected officials who have over time been hijacked by. There was a time in the 1970s where this Zionistic cabal didn't control the United States to the degree they do now. If you went to the State Department, if you went to the Pentagon, you had this class of people called the Arabists, because oil was very important. And the Arabists were there. And I remember the struggles that were taking place between the Arabists and the Zionists, and the Arabists would often win. When I was doing the Gulf War, there was many times when the Zionists were put down. I mean, the irony is one of the people that put down the Zionist ambitions was Paul Wolfowitz, who later on went to be one of the architects of one of the ultimate pro-Zionist movements. But at the time, he worked for a president who wasn't completely controlled by the pro-Israeli crowd. A president who, George Herbert Walker Bush, whatever you think of him, he wasn't controlled by them. He actually told them to pound sand on several occasions. Bill Clinton was controlled by them, because Bill Clinton was a man who his personal sexual appetites led him to be compromised. That's just a statement of fact. And then he empowered the deep state so that when George W. Bush became president, who was not sexually compromised by these people, but he now had to pay attention to the empowered deep state. And the empowered deep state hijacked important parts of his legacy, to include using 9/11 as a vehicle to go to war against, 5 nations in 5 years, or 7 nations in 7 years. And just on and on and on and on. So I guess the thing is, it's too simplistic to say that Israel's pulling the strings. The right way to say it is that a cabal in the United States that uses Israel is pulling the strings.
One of the things that I think you brought up, and I think that's probably how Professor Chudovsky thinks of it. There was a time when generals and colonels, in the Pentagon were, like you're saying, were focused on peace and ways of preserving their soldiers and their sailors and things like that. And this, anyone who has that consciousness now is demoted or retired. And the people that are promoted are a very different breed, and they're very much more in the military-industrial complex. So we've lost, I think, and this is, based on some of your discussion and your reports, we've lost some of the integrity of our military commanders.
Yeah.
And it's a different crowd than it was, let's say when John F. Kennedy was president.
The military's job is to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver. My job isn't peace. When I joined the Marine Corps, my job isn't peace. That's the politician's job. My job is to kill. My job is to be the best trained killer you've ever seen in your life. My job is to be in a basement being fed red meat, so that when you unlock the basement and you unleash me, I go out and I destroy everything in my path. That's the job of the military. Let's not pretend otherwise. but we need politicians to control that. Now, the military's job is to be apolitical. I just sit there and growl and I wait for blood. And hopefully the ideal career is I spend 20 years in the basement waiting for blood that never comes, because the politicians are smart enough to say, we don't want to unleash the beast. But the beast has to be ready to eat. The beast has to be prepared to eat all the time. So we train and train and train and train. And that's the job of the military, to train, so that when the politicians come and say, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, you go, got it, sir. Wait, check. Is it proportional? Has Congress weighed in? Because we took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so we have to ensure everything we do is constitutional. But after we check it off, it doesn't matter. Again, I've told the story before. When Major General Matt Caulfield called me in, pulled me out of the amphibious warfare school to be on this planning cell working for Commandant of the Marine Corps, Al Gray, we were talking about Iraq and why we were going to war. And I told him, I said, sir, we're fighting the wrong Arabs. I said, the Iraqis are actually pretty cool people. When you want to dig a ditch in Iraq, the Iraqis dig the ditch. We're going to war on behalf of Kuwait, who will never dig a ditch. These are a bunch of fat, effeminate, ridiculously over wealthy idiots who hate us, and they don't do any work. They hire other people to come in and dig their ditches for them. And the same thing with the Saudis. We're fighting the wrong Arabs.
the Dow right now.
All right, everybody, what's up? Hello. I'm not sure where Pasta went. He was just here. But we have a great show for you today. Happy Friday. Hope you are all excited for the weekend. Yeah, what a week. What a week. There's just so much going on. You know, let me just say that, again, the US does not hesitate to disappoint us. The squad doesn't hesitate to disappoint us. I just saw that the squad voted against the congressional vote to go after everybody for the sexual misconduct. And I'm not surprised at all, but at the same time, you would think that would be the lowest of the lowest thing you could do. And the thing is, I said this yesterday, I think it's because we are ruled by the United States of Epstein that a lot of this shit has become so normalized for us. It's normal for us to live in a society where our congressional leaders are rare if they actually do something good. We've kind of gotten used to that whole thing where we expect them to just be shit. This is why I don't believe in electoral politics, why I tell everybody, you know, electoral politics isn't the way, electoral politics is not the answer, essentially. Because we're not going to change anything from within. I mean, you have certain people like Thomas Massey and a few others who are trying to get things done, who are trying to fight what is happening right now in Iran. But the majority of people just go along with it. You had AOC yesterday give an interview where he was saying, oh, the Iranian regime is so bad and we want to free the Iranian people, but, you know, there's a way to do it. It's like the same bullshit. I'd rather even Trump's way, at least we know exactly where we stand. The Democrats are trying to use the situation to really fundraise for the upcoming midterms, and they're trying to use the situation to, in a couple years, get one of them in the White House. And it couldn't be any more apparent than it already is. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, do fall for it. You have the likes of Nick Fuentes and others telling people to vote Democrat. And because Nick Fuentes said a few bad things about Jews, then people assume like he's, you know, an anti-Zionist in the Palestinian cause, which you've got to be a little bit smarter than that. And so we're in a situation where it just becomes harder and harder for people to keep up with this. I mean, we're going to talk about Cuba, we're going to talk about Venezuela, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Lebanon and how Lebanon is being attacked in a very, very Nazi way, where they're forcing people out. I would call it the second Nakba. They're trying to displace entire groups of people. And you know why they're trying to do this? Well, they're trying to do this in an effort to be able to have a ground invasion and then take the entirety of Lebanon. And the worst part of it is the sellout government of Lebanon, which cannot survive without Hezbollah, but constantly criticizes Hezbollah, is making laws that are going to basically affect Hezbollah. They're going after anybody that's fighting back. So this is about to get bigger. This whole thing is about to expand. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. I've been, you know, talking to the people in Lebanon right now, and things are pretty dire. The Israelis are bombing everywhere. And again, they always attack Lebanon because they use it as a proxy. It's not a proxy. They're their own people, but Israel uses it as a proxy. So more on that in a second. Pasta, are you okay?
Yeah, I had some family stuff to take care of over here. Got to take care of mom's. She's doing good. She's really a little extra excited today, but I had to go take care of her. Huh?
You're frozen, I believe. Yeah, you look frozen.
Is that better?
There you go. Yeah. You know, you didn't do that before. Now you're just doing it all the time.
I don't
It's
know.
weird.
The internet's been weird over here, so I've been trying to kind of like fix it and stuff. But maybe it's just I'm not having it. I have it hard lined in, so hopefully that's it. Yeah, I mean, sorry for being tardy and late today. Thank you for filling in, fam. And I know we're gonna have Professor Danny Shaw come over here. I got off the phone with my source in Tehran this morning, and he's on the outskirts of Tehran because there's a lot of bombing. But he's going back in, taking a look. He says the United States has bombed over 10 hospitals, fam, in Tehran.
Yeah.
And they're also bombing, what's interesting too as well, they're also bombing police stations. And according to his kind of try to figure it out, he feels that, he said is like 75% of the people are obviously with the government, about 25% are still hold offs and want the Shah's son to come back in. You still get those type of people that are there. So when you hear people like on the news blast, oh, they want us to bomb, they're happy that we're liberating them, they're taking a small segment and trying to make it bigger. But those people do exist. However, he goes, the attitude is for the people in the streets, the ones who are really upset, and they're upset too as well because of the way Khomeini was martyred. They don't want any type of retreat. They want no surrender. And he says they're also bombing police stations. The reason why they're doing that is that they know that the American administration, the Trump administration, is trying to tap the Kurds to go in. So they want some form of, they want to try to destabilize as much as they can. So they're hitting, hospitals, schools, police stations, because they're hoping that there's some form of chaos that could take place, that if the Kurds were to come in, they would take advantage of the craziness that's going on. But it's not happening, he's saying, at all. In fact, and he says on their local news stations, they're seeing a lot of pounding of Israel. Now, I've been saying this for quite some time, fam. They're suppressing a lot. They're not even talking about what's going on on mainstream media. On Fox News, it's just, you would think that, that Iran is just this dinky little country that has no way of defending, and they're getting bombed back to the Stone Age. And they're hitting all these military, we're hitting this military spot, that military spot. Like, no, you know what I'm saying? That's not what's happening. And pretty much the Strait of Hormuz, we did a story yesterday talking about the fact that Donald Trump has ordered any oil tankers to be escort through. I don't know which aircraft carrier, but it got really close in and this is why they're bombing in Indian Ocean, right? They're going after vessels in the Indian Ocean in international waters, illegal, number one. But the reason why is they can't get into the Gulf. It's too tight in there, and Iran would wipe anything out that gets in there if it gets too close. So they're staying far back. So this looks like they're going to be digging in pretty tight, for the long run, if they're going to continue to do this. But I'd like to know clear reports on what's going on actually in Israel, because we also get these reports too, fam, and they got the same reports in Tehran that they're pounding those bases. He had a friend in Qatar, and they said they keep hitting that base over there. They're reducing that base down to rubble over there. The bases in Qatar, the bases in Bahrain. So I mean, we're not getting clear evidence of what's going on. Obviously, our meter is not going to help us, but this doesn't look like it's going to turn out to be the war that the United States thought it would be. I don't know if there was a lot of cockiness and confidence coming out of the whole Maduro situation, fam. But from what I'm hearing on the ground over there, it's not a cakewalk for the United States military, regardless of how many times Donald Trump goes on there. Fam, we have the greatest military in the world. It ain't going to work in this situation. So dig in, Americans, I guess. But I don't know how long they're going to suppress these numbers. But once you start hearing these bodies coming home in body bags, and it's going to happen. So we'll see. Because also, from what I understand, is that Iran is trying to hit hotels where there's military personnel or wherever they're staying. So I don't know if there's residents, civilians in there too, but they're going after American military personnel wherever they're at. So we'll see. And that sucks. This sucks, right? These kids who got thrown into this war, they were propagandized for so long. They thought they were fighting for freedom. You're not fighting for freedom, guys. You're poor people fighting rich men's wars. Get the fuck out. Desert. Leave. Do not take these orders. These orders are unconstitutional and unjust. Get out.
All right, fam. Should we bring our guest in? 'Cause
We
he's
should,
here.
but first let's talk. Let's while he's probably went to go get a cup of coffee or maybe went to the bathroom real quick. The head is what we said
Okay.
in the military. Let's show our give, send, go, because fam, you got some love there. You got some love from some happy birthday love came in after, you know. Pedro, fam, vote for Pedro. I think we read this. Pasta, you're pretty cool. Keep up the good work. You guys are second to none. We read that last time, but I like to read it again when they say Pasta, you're pretty cool. You know? 2. Hugh. Fuck Hugh gave us $25. Thank you so much. Happy birthday, Fee. I remember when I was 28. What else we got? Anonymous, fam. This anonymous person. I can't wait to meet him or her. Love you, Pasta. Happy birthday, Fee. Thank you to the anonymous giver. You guys can go over there and help. Guys, we got a lot of work to do. We fam and I have been talking, you know, $5 given to happy birthday for you again, fam. Glad I found you two again. That's the thing. We're, you know, even on the YouTube right now, our circle is not red. Like there's a stream going out. And that's what it's supposed to be. So I don't know how many people are getting notice of this, guys. So we're going to need you to like, share, and share like the Dickens. See that share button on that Give, Send, Go? Right? It's Give, Send, Go / Election Integrity Matters. Hit that share button. If you can't do the give, share like the Dickens. Let's get as many shares
See, it's
as
the
gives.
1800s, guys. Share like the Dickens.
Like the Dickens. Hi, Anna. And fam, here was the last one that came in after from TD. Old school TD.
Oh, thank you.
TD, thank you so much, man. Or
We
woman.
appreciate it.
We don't know who TD is, but thank you. On this special day, fam, please know how appreciated you are. Happy birthday, fam, Fiorella.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you
go
all
over
for the
there.
love. We really appreciate it.
And well, let's share the link. I'll do that right now. Some of our producers are on assignment. Some haven't woken up and gotten here yet. Fred, get in here. Where you at? We love you and we need you. But I'm gonna share real quick. If somebody can share it in the Rumble, that would be great. It's shared in the Kick. It's shared in the YouTube. What if they knew this war would cause a global economic collapse, which would present an opportunity to install technocracy across the world? Just wondering. And Snow is going to be on the show soon. Snow was supposed to be on my interview show, and that was the month my friend passed away, and then I had the job in Minnesota, so I had to cancel him on it twice. But Snow is a friend of the show. He's Canadian, yeah, but he's going to come on the show sooner or later, come talk with us. He does a great show over on INN with Crab. You got Crab and Snow, or some people like to say Snow Crab. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be, but it does make me wonder why, if they are going to try to cause a global shutdown, why did the United States spend so much time, effort, and energy to go and try and seize or grab as much as Venezuelan's oil as possible? And all that happened beforehand. Like we even said, yeah, when they grab Venezuela or they go do their thing in Venezuela, that means it's green lights go for Iran, because they know Iran, a lot more capable, a lot more powerful, can shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and that can cause a whole economic fucking breakdown. Go ahead, fam.
Sometimes I feel like people just get caught up in like the whole big picture thing and they ignore like the realities on the ground, or vice versa. So some people just look at, you know, what's going on the ground, like a lot of our anti-imperialist friends, and they don't look at the connections to like the World Economic Forum and Agenda 2030. You have to look at both. And if you're not looking at both, you're missing a picture. So yes, I mean, that's the obvious plan is Agenda 2030, where we're headed towards technocratic surveillance. But that's also part of the reason you're seeing this these wars, because the United States is trying to expand Greater Israel, create its technocratic surveillance state in Gaza and Palestine. That will be expanded into the entirety of the Middle East if they get their way. And then, in my opinion, what's going to happen is they're going to try to balkanize Russia anyway. Russia is actually far more vulnerable between China and the United States. And ultimately, this is a pursuit of resources. We're looking at these minerals that are rare earth, but really not even so rare. They're just necessary for this era that we're entering. And in those minerals are very much present in Venezuela, in Latin America, and there's a lot of oil in these countries as well. That's also part of it. So that's why you're seeing the competition for these resources. Now, is this a war with Iran? Yeah, it is a war with Iran. I hate it when people say, "Oh, this is a war, with Russia,
China,
or this
yeah.
is a war with China." You're taking away agency from the people of Iran who are literally dying and sacrificing themselves to do what none of these other powerful countries could do, and take on, the United States. Iran is really shaming everybody right now. And so are Hezbollah. So are the resistance forces in Iraq. So are the resistance in Yemen, Ansarallah. And they're really showing the world what needs to happen, the reaction that you need towards the Epstein class. But they can't do it alone. Like, we would need a bloc for this to be an actual, war like that. What it is looking like is a war more so for the competition of these resources, economics, and ultimately, of course, you're going to have China and the United States, but their war is more so economic. Neither of them actually want a destruction of the economic supply chain, because they want to profit as much as possible and accumulate as much wealth as possible. And I think a lot of people dismiss China's role in this, or what China does. Like, just because it's China is very much in pursuit of AI, in pursuit of surveillance, in pursuit of all of that. And Russia is actually making moves to do the same thing right now, which is why a lot of people are getting pissed off about a lot of the internet stuff that's happening over there. So this is, yes, but let's not ignore the realities that are happening too on the ground, and the people actually trying to stop it.
Yeah. Well,
We could go deeper into that
Yeah.
next time, but
we
just
can.
wanted to
we'll,
address that.
And fam, we'll also ask our guest that, because it's an important thing, because you're right. Because I mean, I saw a lot of the tweets you're talking about, Kim.com. I mean, I do think that at the end of the day, that the United States, it was a cherry. It was a bonus to say, all right, if we can mess with the Belt and Road Initiative of China in Iran, take away a lot of those, corridors that we had talked about, that's a bonus. But China's not jumping in. They're not getting involved. And it is kind of sad to sit back and go, where the fuck is China? Where the fuck is Russia? You know what I'm saying? It's they're not at war with China, because at the end of the day, China and Russia, I think they want to do business with the West more than anything. And they'll sit back. They will, if it's a situation like, we'll figure a way around it. But to jump in a war right now versus Iran, with Iran versus the West, they're not going to do it. They're sitting back. So let's jump in our guest right now, because there's a lot of things to talk about. Because I'm really wondering, like I said, and when he gets on, I'm gonna make a tweet and talk about what I've saw on the ground. Danny, we're here, ladies and gentlemen. Danny Shaw is with us. We're gonna talk about Cuba. He's got a lot of insight to that, but he's been paying attention to what's been going on in Israel for quite some time. So Danny, there's a lot of things to talk about today, but why don't you start off with giving us, welcome to the show, first of all. It's great to see you. Why don't you give us your overall assessment of what you see, what you think is taking place? Because the media there's a lot of suppression in the media, right? If the mainstream media, I know you don't watch it anyways, the idiots that watch it here in Florida, but they're making reports as if they're just taking out Iran, their launch capabilities left and right, that they've destroyed their Navy completely, that this is just a matter of time. Now, yes, you have some senators who didn't care about the War Resolutions Act, the one that Massey was pushing to stop this before it happened. They let it happen. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and now they're complaining about it after, just to go after Trump. So we see the political posturing. But what do you see happening altogether right now? What is taking place? If you have any sources on the ground, if you have any information, please, Danny Shaw, give it to us.
Peace, peace, peace. Fiorella, Pasta, the whole TruthWire family. Good to be back, fresh back from Cuba. We wanted to do the interview live from Cuba, but with Marco Rubio and Donald Trump's ongoing assault on Cuba, it's almost impossible to access the internet out there. In terms of Iran, in terms of the Zionist U.S. imperialist war on the people's sovereignty in Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, all of Western Asia. We lost Craig there, but hopefully he'll be back. You know, I haven't spoken publicly about this, but last summer I spent a lot of time in the region. I was not allowed to into Palestine. The Zionist authorities would not allow me into Palestine for obvious reasons. But I was in on the ground in southern Lebanon, in the Dahia, which translates into the periphery of Beirut or the ghettos. I saw the massive craters opened up in the earth to kill Nasrallah, to terrorize entire communities. These are the worst forms of terrorism. These are the worst forms of manifest destiny. These are the worst forms of white supremacy, of Jewish supremacy, of Zionism. You're talking about millions and millions of families in southern Lebanon. I was in the Bekaa Valley. Obviously, I can't be too specific. In fact, I never posted one thing on social media about my time in Lebanon with the resistance, because they've criminalized even humanizing in any way how these communities live. But one thing that we can say is that every Western bomb, every bomb of colonial arrogance that drops on, whether it's an Iranian police station or an Iranian school, as we saw the little girls' school, 160 little girls and their teachers killed, all they're doing is creating more resistance fighters. They're creating more anti-imperialist resentment. This is going to be a long war. We heard the Persian authorities say, invade us. We dare you to invade us. And got to go back to Ho Chi Minh and go back to Jose Marti and all these different independence fighters from across the world. The moment they invade Iran, you know, almost every Iranian, you know, some 93 million people minus at this point, the official death toll they're giving now is approaching 2,000. I would double or triple it when you begin to consider how many people are under the rubble. Pasta mentioned his sources. Well, I've been working with, this is another thing the audience may not know. I've worked with Iranian media for the last 12 years. I have not been able to get a hold of one of my colleagues or friends. They interviewed me on Friday night about Cuba. I had just gotten back. And after that, it was lights out. I've not been able to touch base with any of my Iranian colleagues. This is an incredible nightmare. This is the.
Can I say something about that really quickly, Danny? My source also told me that Press TV is not. It's not. They can't watch it right now for some reason. And my friend watches Press TV a lot. Right? He says that it's not coming in. They can't get it. It's limited to what they can get, obviously, with all the bombs going on. So this is the second person now, and that hearing you say this is confirming what he is also saying. Please continue.
Yeah, I've seen Press TV, the website on and off. And of course, every war is a war of disinformation. It's a social media war. We see the CIA plants on X saying, oh, thank you for bombing us here in Tehran. You've only hit very precise military targets. Those, of course, are the CIA, New York Times, Miami Herald talking points. The Iranian people are resisting with everything. Of course, there's going to be part of the population that wants to pivot back to colonialism, to the Shah, to the prior to the 1979 period. It's amazing how much they've demonized the Ayatollah and the Revolutionary Guard. You know, who are the greatest terrorists on earth, the genocidaires, and they're now expanding that genocidal impulse, that genocidal energy that's been parachuted down on Gaza now, coming up on 2.5 years. Look what they're doing to southern Lebanon. Look what they're doing to the Bekaa Valley. This is for people like myself who've been going to Cuba since 1995, who've been anti-imperialists for decades and decades. Imagine we fought our entire lives so that Cuba could breathe, and Iran could breathe, and Vietnam could breathe, and in Nicaragua, and where I met you all, where we began to work together in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and in Managua, Nicaragua. That's why I have so much love and respect for y'all getting out there and trying to challenge the corporate mainstream media. We've worked our entire lives, and to see this the world aflame, the world ablaze in Trumpian, imperialist, racist flames. It's, of course, very, very hurtful. I think there's a collective insomnia that plagues all freedom-loving people. Of course, people in Cuba, as we begin to pivot to Cuba, I can't tell you how many of my friends and sources, to use Pasta's word, they're están arrancando la greña. They're pulling out their hair because of the anxiety. And we heard Trump last night. Trump said, well, we're going to finish up with Iran, and then Cuba's next. I mean, the colonial arrogance of these individuals is almost unprecedented. And one has to ask, is it 1492 or 2026?
Yeah. Well, Danny, I mean, you see this war on any anti-imperialist sector. I mean, that's pretty much what this is, and in very much a way that I think is kind of reducing it to the crux of what we're facing. It's a war between good and evil, a war between the Epstein predator class and pretty much everybody else who's resisting that mentality, that weird Zionist supremacist dark mentality. And Iran is representing one axis of it, the axis of resistance, but there's also other areas of resistance that are standing with Iran. And one of those is Cuba. And you just got back from Cuba, and Cuba cannot be forgotten. Cuba has fought back and stood their ground in spite of everything that's been thrown at them, 60 plus years of blockade, of sanctions, of the same type of propaganda that Iran faces, where there's a brutal dictatorship, and that people are suffering, and people are suffering because of the sanctions, because of the stranglehold that Donald Trump has now put, and the lack of course, oil that he is preventing others from aiding Cuba with. Since you were just there under these circumstances, can you tell us a bit about what that looks like, and how are people reacting to what the United States is doing?
Yeah. Thanks so much again for having me. Ideally, it would be the Cuban people who could articulate their own everyday struggles. What I try to do, every country I've ever gone to.
That's the Danny Sean notepad. I love it, dude. We're in Brazil, sitting down, having something to eat. Danny's like, hold on, right? Push the feijoada aside, get some notes going. I love it. Please.
91 pages of notes from Cuba, just listening to people. I've been going to Cuba since 1995, so 31 years. When you tally up my 7 different visits to Cuba, it's in the range of almost 6 months. And I first went as a brigadista, as an internationalist on one of the July 26th and Pastures for Peace in the Venceremos brigade. These were in the 1990s and 2000s, and it's ongoing. Belly of the Beast right now is also organizing solidarity trips, which everyone should check out. I mean, no time could be more important for us to break the siege, break the blockade, and go to Cuba. So that's how I first arrived as a 16-year-old. I began to learn Spanish in Cuba. I remember still the first words I ever learned. Back then, I was in Matanzas, which is one of the other provinces of Cuba, and we were there for the volunteer labor, what you saw Ernesto Che Guevara do every Sunday in the early 1960s, get out there and volunteer to help out the Cuban economy. And I was in the citrus fields and the orange fields. So that was my intro to Cuban Spanish. And 31 years later, I probably have like 10 of those different little pocket notebooks, and then I put them into bigger notebooks. I've traveled big chunks of Cuba's 16 provincias, and then La Isla de la Juventud, the island of youth, which is also one of the other provinces of Cuba. And I just try to listen to people. I try to take the temperature of the revolution. Super grateful for the solidarity brigades, but when you go on those solidarity trips, you're more confined. You go see like a model farm, and you see kind of like a model town or city like San Antonio de los Baños, and you stay with a Cuban family, and these things are so important, but most of it is in La Habana. And we know that Havana is not Cuba, and Cuba is not Havana. There is a lot of variation within how Cubans live. So with this trip, I really tried to get into the poorest areas of Cuba, the areas that were most historically underdeveloped by Spanish colonialism, later on with U.S. neocolonialism, and that's Guantanamo, and that's Santiago in the south or the east of Cuba. So it's important to report back and share my different impressions, and hopefully in the course of our conversation, you all can show some of the footage that I showed that I've posted so far online, because we can talk all day. I always say this to my students, but when you see the actual images, when you see what people are going through on an everyday basis, a picture or a video is worth a million words, because it humanizes what people are going through. So I flew into Holguín. This is now going back about 3 weeks. Flew into Holguín. Holguín is a regional trading center. It's a center of commerce. It's something like, it's more to the south. It's not right in the middle of the country. It's closer to Santiago than it is to Havana. But I would say relatively in Holguín, one of the biggest cities in the country, people are better off because there's big containers that have not historically, but more recently arrived, since it's a regional center of commerce. But then when you get into the campus, the countryside of Holguín, and you go to the more marginalized areas, and when I made my way up to Guadalajara, which was a huge tourist center, and I documented the last Canadians left 2 Tuesdays ago. Yeah, you could show that one. That's more me talking. Don't that one's not going to be as exciting. I would scroll down, show the horse one. The horse one, I think I put out on Monday. Take a second to find the horse one. That'll show you more how Cubans are living every day. That last one there is just more me commenting. So when I got up to Guadalajara, I saw an avalanche, a stampede of these tourist buses leaving, because the way that Trump did it, shutting off all the oil, a plane coming from Germany, a plane coming from Canada or Italy can no longer refuel in Cuba. So that means they can no longer get there. So they have tightened the blockade more than ever. And this blockade is on top of 36 years of a special period. This blockade is on top of, as Fiorella said, 67 years of the U.S. bourgeoisie, of the Western ruling classes, trying to topple Cuba, because they know Cuba is a pearl of the Antillean Islands. If they control all of that tourism, if they can control all of that nickel and natural wealth, their main goal is to get rid of the Cuban Communist Party as an arbiter of foreign trade, of investment. And the Cuban Communist Party, similar to the Iranians, have done everything to negotiate. When Trump and Rubio and the Zionists broke off negotiations with Iran, the Iranians thought they were getting further than ever, and they were willing to negotiate about the use of nuclear fuel and everything. But we know that the imperialists and the military-industrial complex, they want war. They profit from war. The Venezuelans, the Cubans, they're completely willing to negotiate and sit down. David does not underestimate the power of Goliath. The Cubans don't have any illusions that they have any way of resisting in a military or economic sense, or even in a diplomatic sense right now, this onslaught of U.S. pressure. I'll comment more. I don't know if you have the video queued up, but whenever that horse video is.
What horse video? Do you know? Because I don't see any.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll find it and then send it.
We can share. We can have him share it. It's the one where you're riding, like you said, like, everybody out there in the West, going around, gas is high and everything, but look what's up with Cuba. They have to reduce to, getting transportation with a horse.
Oh, I see.
By the way, Danny, there was a couple things, but before I first thing is, I want you to think about this. You don't have to answer now, but stew on it. I asked my friend, I said, what name, this is from Tehran. I said, what name do we use for these people, like these Patrick Bet Davids and whatnot? I know we use the term Uncle Tom. Is Uncle Mohammed okay? He goes, Pasta, I've been calling them, and listen to this, Persanos, which is like the Persian version of a gusano. So I want you to stew on that. If Persano is a good name for that too as well. And secondly, in all seriousness, can people get in and out of Cuba now as far as the way you were flying in there? You said a couple of weeks ago. Is that still possible for people to do? I know their colonization is on hold until things are, worked out over in Iran. I don't know what Ecuador was all about, just a little warm up in between. But can people get in and out to Cuba right now? Is it completely shut down, blocked off, or is it possible, do you think, within the next month to get in there? If journalists want to get in there, if people want to bring humanitarian aid, if the church people want to get in there to bring stuff, what's it like right now in Cuba? Is it on lockdown or not?
Great question. And just as I begin to answer, they just texted me from Iran. They have rolling coverage with Press TV. So speak of the angels, in this case, speak of the devil would be Rubio and Trump. Speak of the angels, the Persian angels. They just asked me to go live in Tehran. So they do have some signal.
Thank God. Yeah.
It is a David versus Goliath battle, but to even hear back from them, of course, is a good thing. So, yeah, I was able to catch a flight to Miami, and from Miami fly into Holguin, because you have Cuban Americans. Cuban Americans are the economic lifeline of the island, or what's left of it. I'm going to break down the economics of the asphyxiation campaign. I wish Trump and his administration were taking a break from starving Cuba and recolonizing Cuba. That definitely not. There is no respite. There's no pause for the Cuban people. Now, in terms of whether they'll use Iran-like tactics, Gaza-like tactics, Venezuela-like tactics, in terms of how they're going to strike against Cuba, we should definitely analyze that. I think they're going to use kind of a hybrid strategy, but we can take a step back and reflect on that. But there are still flights from Miami. So the flights from other European countries and Canada have been cut off. But and I'll tell you why they haven't touched the flights from Miami. Because 4 days ago, the Trump administration announced that they were going to allow oil to get in, but for who? The MIPYMES, the private sector. So that's one thing that the audience really has to look at closely. The MIPYMES, that's just a Cuban Spanish abbreviation for small, micro-sized, and medium-sized private businesses. But in terms of understanding Cuba, the 99%, or more accurately, the 95% of Cuban people, of course, don't have access to divisas. Divisas are dollars or euros. They only have the Cuban peso. And right now, the Cuban peso is at 500 Cuban pesos for $1 US. But tomorrow, it'll probably be 520. We have to understand devaluation of a people's currency as a weapon of war. We have to understand inflation as a weapon of war. Because in Gaza, for example, it's not that there's no food in Gaza, but the few little stores left, according to the aid workers and Palestinian friends of mine who are still, by some miracle, alive, there is food, but it's at 700% inflation. So to get a loaf of bread, you would have to have $8 US. Who's going to have $8 US in blockaded Palestine? And the blockade didn't begin post October 7th, 2023. The blockade began in 1948, right? Similar to Cuba. The war on Cuba didn't just begin with Trump's announcement on January 27th that there was an energy and oil blockade. So the MIPYMES are balling. These little private stores, which is funded by Cuban American money and capital, other foreigners or Cubans who live in Madrid, for example, or even Cubans who are from Cuba who perhaps have had a good relationship with the government or a business men through their families, through the generations. So you do have this private sector. Someone like me, of course, I had dollars in my pocket and I was constantly changing the dollars. So when you change 50 US dollars, you end up with like a stack like this. Anyone who spent time in Venezuela over the years, there was a time where if you changed even 10 US dollars in Venezuela, you would need almost a suitcase for the bolivares you were about to receive. But I think the worst devaluation of currency I've ever seen in my life was in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean bond. And Zimbabwe is probably the last country in Africa where at the level of the state, they still have a sense of sovereignty. That's why they got rid of Libya under Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. For all of the liberals out there who think that this is just a Trump thing and Trump is the devil, no, it's an entire system that's the devil. Trump is just the tip of this spear. So I've said a lot. Maybe I put the video in the chat. If you want to show that video now, or I can keep responding.
There it is. There it is.
Transportation, traveling by horse in 2026. Elon Musk can have 800 billion Teslas. The Cuban people reduced to transportation with a horse. That's the world we live in. This is a surgeon I just met, a surgeon from the hospital, a doctor, and she can no longer work. The hospitals aren't functioning. There's no electricity. This was a theater. Eso fue un teatro. This used to be a theater. It's not functioning. ¿Cómo le dice? All of this is a children's park.
No
and
children.
All they're missing now is children. And
Where are the children?
this is the reality of Cuba now. We're in some of the popular neighborhoods in Santiago.
Unbelievable that they have to travel by horse. Danny, what exactly do you know is being done? Where are we with the shipments? I know Mexico shipped 2 shipments. I thought there was a Russian vessel going with oil, but it had stalled. How many has Cuba received any shipments of oil? And is there anything coming right now as we speak?
Yeah, Claudia Sheinbaum and the Mexicans have been sending as much help as they can. There is an anti-imperialist flotilla. This trip's with belly of the beast. The Venezuelans continue to try to send humanitarian aid, but the Trump administration has been blocking a lot of that. And you know, I have to give you just the truthful, sober response. Those flotillas, that is very symbolic aid. You're talking about an island of 10.5 million Cubans. And notice I said 10.5, and you know how they always say 10.5 and counting? 10.5 and decreasing every day. The war on Cuba is a demographic war. The war on Cuba is a campaign of consistent depopulation of Cuba. And I think that's something that we have to take a closer and closer sobering look at, as much as it hurts us to do so. So there are attempts at flotillas. The Russians have tried to send more aid. The Chinese have sent solar panels over the course of the past year or two. But it's very, very difficult. And a lot of that stuff ends up in Havana, in Centro Havana, in La Vieja Havana, and any delegation that we go on from the Western world will, of course, go to Havana and concentrate on those neighborhoods. But Las Tunas is the least visited province. And that's really where you see the effects of depopulation, because people aren't going to get any support there. So you have this internal migration phenomenon as of the 1990s, where people had to leave Las Tunas and Santiago and Holguín and Guantánamo and migrate north to Havana. And in Cuban slang, you call the internal migrants to Havana los Palestinos, the Palestinians, because they're the ones who have been forced to be uprooted from their ancestral historical traditions and try to make a living in the capital city, where there's always going to be relatively more of an abundance of foreign exchange and little goods. In terms of this, this video with the horse, more and more Cubans every day have to travel by horse in carriage. Certainly, it's like a scene out of the 19th century. Not every Cuban travels on horse, but many certainly have to. I would say, just based off of that clip, there are Cubans who are relatively much better off, and unfortunately, there are Cubans who are relatively much worse off. And what I try to do with my trips, no different than all of the time I've spent in Haiti since 1998, all the time I've spent in the Dominican Republic since 1997, I tried to document and offer brief insights into how everyday Cuban nurses and doctors and workers and construction workers and teachers and students and children and grandparents live, no different than, our time together in Sao Paulo. I just want to break down a little bit of the math. That surgeon who was sitting in front of me, and I also had to be careful too, right? Because turning the lens, the camera on Cubans as they go through their everyday lives of survival, one doesn't want to be too intrusive, but how do we tell these stories so a Western audience can feel some level of intimacy? Convivir. Convivir is the word in Spanish when you live alongside a people, which is really the only way to understand how a people lives. And a surgeon making $12,000, 12,000 pesos per month. That's 24 US dollars. And a lot of the nurses and surgeons and professors are not even receiving their checks right now, similar with the pension, la chequera, así es que se llama en Cuba, the pension checks, which are delivered to your house or you get out of an ATM. You just see lines and lines and lines, these long queues of retirees, of the abuelitos, the viejitos trying to get their pension checks, which come out to like 3,000, if that, 2,400, 3,000, which would be $6 a month. So let's just stick with the surgeon, who of course is going to be relatively much better off than most people in Cuban society. If the surgeon makes 24 US dollars per month, but a carton of eggs, if you can get it, is going to be $5. A thing of bread is going to be $1.50. On my last day, there's a thing of spaghetti that you would boil was up to $2. So everyone's calculating, how can I survive? The big thing in Cuba, everywhere you go, un pomo de aceite. How much is a thing of cooking oil? It's actually sunflower oil from Turkey, because Turkey was able to do whatever they were able to do to break the blockade, not because I think Erdogan and his government or these capitalists in Turkey cared about the Cuban people, but they were selling whatever excess of they were thinking of their own capitalist interests, I'm sure, selling this excess sunflower oil. And every day people would have a thing of sunflower oil and they would say it's up to 2,000 pesos, it's up to 2,100 pesos. And if you're a construction worker, a thing of cooking oil is now your salary, now your monthly salary. How do you survive? So to understand, when I use the words malnutrition and hunger, and yes, I think it is approaching. So many Cubans told me this is Gaza without bombs.
Yeah.
It's Gaza without bombs.
Yeah. That's
Fam,
what
I have
we've
a
been
question.
saying here.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just saying that's what we've been saying here. They're trying to Gazify Cuba. This is the Gazifying of Cuba. The same way. I mean, if you're not allowing things to get in there, it's the same thing that the Israelis were doing to the Palestinians in Gaza. It's the same thing. And they've done it already, so now they can do it again, because the world watched as it was done and wasn't able to stop it. Pasta, go ahead.
Well, my question is that with all this going on and we see the conditions that Cuba is in, right? And there's some people in the chat. There's also a lot of people out here in South Florida, the Gusanos, right? I don't want to say Gusanos, but the pro-imperialist friendly.
The diaspora.
Yeah, thank you.
More politically correct.
Well, I'm trying to talk to these people, so I don't want to.
I know those are your neighbors. You right there in the thick. You can almost see Cuba from the window.
I am. I go to the beach and I can see Cuba. Look, but there are a lot of people when you compare it to, and we've been to Nicaragua, right? In Nicaragua, I know the conditions aren't as harsh and as, what's the word I'm looking for? medieval as the United States is to Venezuela and Cuba as they are. I mean, Nicaragua has a little wiggle room, but we see Nicaragua is not 95% food efficient. We see everything that's going on in Nicaragua. They're making these strides. Why hasn't Cuba been able to, over the years for so long, and maybe you can explain this because I already know the answer, but I want it from Danny Shaw. Why haven't they been able to at least move the ball with industrialization, modernization, and more importantly, being food efficient, right? Why haven't they been able to at least grow a lot more crops and whatnot? Can you explain to the people out there who say that, oh, this is just about Cuba being too militant and not working enough with their agricultural section or their engineers to advance themselves, regardless of the fact that there's a blockade and sanctions that are heavily hurting them, shutting them out of the global economy? Give us an explanation on that.
Yeah, well, the short answer is yes, Cuba has diversified. Cuba does have, of course, like the entire Caribbean, vianda. Anyone who's lived in the Caribbean knows about the root crops, the plantain and the yuca and boniato, the sweet potato. Those are the staples of the Cuban government. But regardless of what you have in the agricultural sector in the outskirts of Santiago, in the outskirts of Guantanamo, if you don't have any fuel, how would you get that from the countryside, which might be up in the mountains? And you can't use these electric tricycles that they use. So it's everyday survival. And what you'll always hear from leftists like myself, I'm a veteran leftist and anti-imperialist, is you'll always hear, the Cubans are so amazing and creative. They know how to reinventar. They know how to inventar, to create and invent space and food where there is none. And they know how to always resistir, to resist. And what I've heard now from so many Cubans, we are sick of resisting. We're sick of reinventándonos. We just want to live. Why can't we just live? Why can't we eat? How are we a threat to the United States? And for Trump to pass this legislation and say that Cuba represents an extraordinary threat to the United States, what threat? How is starving the Cuban people in any way benefiting us here in the United States? Well, we have all of our own economic issues, and what I really witnessed in my overall synthesis or thesis from this trip, what I'm researching and writing upon right now, is capitalist natural selection. Now, this is natural selection, capitalist style. Those in power, the neo-colonizers of Cuba, the Cuban Americans with the capital for the MIPYMEs, and of course their main spokespeople, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, they don't care. They don't care if older Cubans, frailer Cubans, think about the most vulnerable sectors of society, and that's going to be our old people, cancer patients, social prisoners, some young people who got locked up for whatever. And I visited with a group of prisoners over there because, again, through an ethnographic lens, through a sociological lens, you want to hear things from every perspective.
Yeah.
Just because some people got pissed off at me. How can you be riding a horse? You don't need to ride a horse. No, I don't need to ride a horse. But from 10 to 20 to 30%, whatever the statistics are, of Cubans do need to ride a horse in order to get home, in order to get to work. So I'm trying to cover all of reality, which is impossible, of course. But the more snippets showing how everyday people live, I think we can educate ourselves more, because I think we have a tendency on the left to overcorrect. And this is a self-critique of the left. Again, I went on all of those trips. I heard Fidel speak. I've heard Fidel speak in my life 3, 4, 5 times in Havana, in the Teatro, the Carlos Marx Theater, when Fidel came to Harlem in 1995. And I think often, because as leftists, we need some type of reference point historically. The Soviet Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Grenadian Revolution in 1979. You mentioned the Sandinistas and the incredible work that they've done. People get so caught up in Nicaragua and only want to talk about the president, Daniel Ortega, and the first lady, the vice president, Rosario Murillo, that they never talk about the millions and millions of Nicaraguans in the grassroots who we got to visit and see how they resist every day. So shout out to all of our friends and comrades in Nicaragua who never get the attention and the credit that they deserve, because they've been hit with sanctions from the Biden regime. Regime.
Right.
Yeah, the friends of say the
ATC, is it?
Yeah. Isn't it AFT?
Is it ATC or I
well, get it correct when one of us is talking, because the
ATC.
audience should know who to support over there in Nicaragua with the incredible grassroots work that they do. In terms of journalists, friends of Cuba who want to get in, yes, you can still get in. Trump just, in his typical colonial arrogance, announced yesterday at a press conference to Marco Rubio at about 5 p.m. that they're coming for Cuba next. We know this, that they're going to finish with Iran first, a country of some 93 million. But you can still get into Cuba. You from Miami, you can still fly into Holguin or Havana or Santiago. So let's talk off air to see what the options are. I think this is the time to be in Cuba and to amplify Cuban voices. Now that gets a little tricky, and I do want to poke. I don't know how much I'll say publicly. We'll see how much y'all can work me in terms of what information you'll get out of me. But for the sorry about that. I try to block all notifications on this
keep
map.
Keep going.
For Cuban people, it's difficult. They're trapped between a rock and a hard place, because if you'll notice with a lot of my coverage, it's not going to come directly from Cuban mouths and interviews with Cubans, because there is still a Cold War siege mentality within Cuba. So the government has felt like they have to be careful in terms of who can make public statements. So a lot of times you'll try to interview a Cuban, and the first thing, because I'll have all these conversations. I'll have conversations with 10, 20, 30, 100, or one-on-one or whatever Cubans in whatever part of Cuba. And then I'll say, hey, let's do it. What do y'all want to say? What do you want to say to the American people? What do you want to say to people around the world? We'll translate it. And they go, Chico, tú estás loco. Tú quieres que me echen 8 años. Yo, está 8 años allá. And they'll tell you, like, I don't want to be put away for 8 years. If I speak openly and they interpret it as somehow I've said something that's counter-revolutionary, they could put me in jail for 8 years. But you'll with all my Cuban friends and associates, and they'll post things on WhatsApp that are very critical. So I think it would be a leftist overcorrection and oversimplification and downright just a rhetorical device if we're just saying that the government perspective represents the 10.5 million people of Cuba. There's no way. We need to go deeper into Cuba and get these voices out. And this is an ongoing conversation, Pasta and I have had, and I learn every day. There's a Marxist joke, there's a Marxist meme that I've seen on the internet. And it's a young Marxist who says, when I look at myself yesterday, and when I look at the thoughts I had last week, I feel nauseous to my stomach. I was such a reformist. I was a social democrat. I was, all these labels we put on one another in this kind of infighting left. And what I'm trying to say with all that is what I knew about Cuba 3 years ago is not what I've learned about Cuba today. Dialectics are constantly evolving in dynamics. So just again, a self-critique where what I thought I knew about Cuba in 1995 is not what I learned in 2001 and in 2014. And when I was there for Fidel's funeral in 2017, I think our analysis is constantly re-synthesized.
Yeah. Can I follow up real quick, Fab, since we're on this topic? Because while we're here, this is important. And then I'll let you get the majority of questions. That is something, I wrote an article I never dropped. I never sent it out because I still was very much in line with stating the fact that this is a country under heavy sanctions, under a blockade. That is the big elephant in the room. But I also talked to young Cubans, right, that didn't care about the revolution. They were like, all right, we don't care about the revolution. It was 60 years ago. We just want to eat. There are people who are critical of the government. And I think that a lot of times when you hear a lot of these leftists that we're talking about in America, the synthetic left or whatever, the ideologues, they want you to believe that everybody in Cuba, everybody in Venezuela is a Che Guevara. Let's go. Yeah, 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 yeah. And that to me is not telling the actual story because it's leaving out the political diversity within the country, right? And that's there in Cuba. It can only happen. It's bound to happen when America globally shuts out, Cuba and tries to starve them. There's going to be some people that are going to turn and like look at their government and blame their own government. We're seeing this now in Iran. My source told me today. He goes, there's 25% of the people in his mind that still want the Shah's son to come back. The majority of the people are in the streets. They don't like what the United States government has done. They support their government now. How is that in Cuba this last time you went out? I mean, after all these years, all these young kids, they have phones there, right? Some of them have phones. They can see that their cousin's friend in Miami is driving around in a nice car, making money, eating sushi and stuff. It's got to because it's got to affect the people of Cuba. What is it like even still right now in your mind from what you see? Is it leaning and going the other way? Is the plan of starving Cuba eventually working for the United States?
I've been nodding my head, very, very a lot because you're so correct. And I don't know if you picked up on it, Pasta, but what I was really saying prior to what you said was a type of mea culpa or a humble apology to you, because I remember that piece. And I was one of the ones that was like, no way, stand with Cuba. And it didn't come, and it wasn't just me, it was with another one of our close friends. And the impulse, of course, is to protect Cuba. The impulse is to stand with this incredible human experiment in 1959, this incredible revolution. But I think that we dogmatically limit ourselves when we do that. And I'm going to take it much further than Pasta even took it. So get ready out there, all these people who have gone on the delegations and all they know is Cuba sí, bloqueo no, and all of the slogans, which are important. I'm not knocking any of that.
Let's get in trouble together, Danny. Come on, baby.
Thank God. Well, y'all were the only ones that ever stood with me on Haiti, so I'm ready to take a bullet for any of y'all. So I appreciate that. But you know how many young Cubans I heard? Si Trump va bombardear, que bombardea ya, coño. If Trump's going to bomb, he should bomb right now. If they're going to invade right now, because these bombs of hunger are worse than anything they can do to us. And when you hear that once, you can dismiss it. And when you go to another neighborhood and you say it again, you kind of tuck it deeper into your mind. But when you've been to Cuba for 31 years and you hear these types of things and this dissatisfaction, over the years, of course, it weighs on you. So I'm sure people can try to label me and say, Danny got soft, and they can say whatever they want. The point of the matter is, and if anyone's read my writing and what I've published with The Gray Zone and with Jayme and Gloria at Covert Action Magazine and in Counterpunch, I've tried to find some type of dialectical balance, which is what Pasta was just hinting at. One way to think of it is like this: the macro context. As Americans, as anti-imperialists, I think 99.9% of our critique should be against our own government, against the blockade, because that's the context of everything that's happening. All those comments from young people about being hungry, well, it's because there's been this blockade, which overnight in 1990, when the Soviet Union fell and East Germany and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania, what Mao Zedong called the Second World, when the Warsaw Pact countries, the socialist bloc, the Soviet-aligned countries fall, the average caloric intake in Cuba went from something like 2,500 and it was halved overnight. So suddenly, in order to get food, and this comes back to your prior question, Cubans have to go to different type of saps that come out of the tree, different types of plants so they can get soap. It's truly, truly desperate. And that's why I mentioned Elon Musk and his $800 billion in profits from Teslas and everything. But people in Cuba are reduced to trying to get around on a horse, electronic tricycles, walking long distance. And then what a lot of nurses and doctors have to do now, and it becomes more and more intense every day, they have to do 24-hour shifts. Because if you can barely get to work and you're a doctor, but you do a 24-hour shift, that way you're there longer. A lot of times the doctors have to get their own stethoscopes and bring them to work with them because they can't access any supplies. So of course, that's why capitalist natural selection. Many of the cancer patients are dying as we speak. It's not like this is not a warning. This is already happening, and this is what I tried to document. When one of the neighborhoods where I was staying knew that I was leaving, and I left super early one morning to go to another area of Santiago, they lined up outside of my door. And Cubans are extremely, extremely proud people. They're never going to ask you for anything, especially not the veterans, the older people. And one of the big bullet points we have to examine, and this is what I've written quite a bit about, there's a big generational rift in Cuba. If you talk to 55, 60, 65-year-olds, they just say, this is the next chapter of the revolution. We'll die for the revolution if we have to die through hunger. But a 65-year-old already has grandchildren. They've already lived their lives. They already knew what it meant to date and go to the movies. And then you look across the street as these 65-year-olds tell me, Daniel, no vamos a morir si sea necesario. And they yelling like it's 1989 or 1959. Then you talk to young people, and young people are like, I don't want to die. I want to live. And Pasta said, you know, if they're watching on Instagram and they can see their cousins and their friends, forget them seeing their cousins and their friends in Miami. The cousins and the friends in Miami come and visit Holguín with their US dollars, live well. This, of course, creates jineterismo. Jineterismo is prostitution, not just sexual prostitution, every type of prostitution, every type of survival. We have to study the political economy of jineterismo, sex work, and because accessing any type of foreign reserves can extend your life and your family's life indefinitely. But a Cuban state salary, which 95% of people, that's the only access they have to. That's why it's capitalist natural selection. Because if you own the MIPYMEs, these different private entrepreneurial projects, then you're doing fine. And when I went to some of these businesses to buy empanadas, to buy the most amazing, Cuban lo camarones in the special red sauce enchilados, I'm having flashbacks. I'm having nostalgia. I can access that, and I could grab 2 or 3 Cuban friends. I never, soy un come solo. I never ate by myself, but you still see the people outside who can't access that, who are the vast, vast majority of Cubans. So they lined up on my last morning, and they were just asking for anything. You have any toothpaste left? People can't buy toothpaste. People can't get soap. They have to use special. They have to find these plants and try to use the plants to get the syrup out to use as soap. Why? Why is this necessary? And then on social media, you have all these Miami Cubans. I want to be careful throwing around the word gusano, because for me, and people can call me as weak as they want, but I've lived this. I've spent a lot of time in these countries. Like, for me, it's not, and Pasta said it, for all the ideologues. Like, to me, this is not an ideological moment. Every moment's ideological. It's not that I'm giving up on socialism and the dream, and I'm not saying this is the end of history, but this is a humanitarian moment. This is not the time to be arguing about who's a gusano and who sold out Cuba. This is a moment to collectively work together, because Miami Cubans mostly have family back in Cuba. How do you benefit from starving them through the politics of this current administration and the billionaires?
I guess, Danny, to just, and the interview with you, since you've said so much, I think it's important we're getting like the full context. The realities of Cuba right now on the ground are dire. People are starving. They're lacking basic essentials. And, I think the ideology the revolution, all of that is an important part of history. But when, as human beings, we don't have access to the most basic needs, everything else goes out the window. And this is exactly, though, precisely what the United States counts on and what the United States has counted on for a long time as a way to get to Cuba. And you can echo the same type of sentiments, for example, from the Soviet Union. The elder people are very nostalgic about the Soviet Union and really appreciate it and really miss it, compared to what exists in capitalist Russian Federation. The youth, however, have nothing to do with that. They want to be like Europe. They want to be like America. This is the question of the reality that we live in as people who really wish for a more egalitarian society, a society with equity. And that's becoming increasingly difficult. It does seem like the United States has its eyes set on Cuba. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. How is the Cuban government, is my last question, prepared to deal with this? Is there going to be, perhaps, in your opinion, a diplomatic attempt, or is it going to take more of an aggressive attempt based on how the government is saying we're not going to negotiate with terrorists, we're not going to allow the Trump administration, the United States, to come in here and take away our sovereignty? How do you think this is going to go?
Yeah, let me address that question. CheeseSlice said he just needs help queuing up the next clip in the comments there. If one of you can help, Jayme. Okay, here we go. Just another clip, which will begin to answer Fiorella. I found where Hamas is hiding. I found them here in Cuba. It's definitely this 1980 roller coaster or whatever you call this thing. I don't think this has worked since 1989. I'm over here looking for Hamas and Hezbollah in Cuba. I think I found them right here. I think we should look inside of this. That little girl looks pretty threatening. Maybe Hezbollah is hiding in this ice cream machine from the 1960s. 20 pesos for frozen ice cream. Jesus Christ. I don't know if it's a penny. It's something like a penny.
Like a
People trying to find transportation to go to Santiago. Transportation crisis. What can people really afford to take the edge off?
Wow.
And, you know, I was just trying to document, like, a lot of Cubans, young Cubans will tell you, going back to that generational ideological rift, young Cubans will tell you over and over, if you're willing to listen, we are sick of being a socialist museum. We're sick of living as artifacts from the past. There's a certain pragmatism or realpolitik that is, of course, creeped into. You're talking about 2 generations that were born during the special period, because the special period never ended. Once the Soviet Union is gone, Cuba stands all on its own. Then in 1998, you have the election of Hugo Chavez. You have the oil internationalism that comes from Venezuela and the Delcy Rodriguez and Nicolás Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, all of this different leadership. Of course, that's why, because I had predicted that they'd go after Cuba first, because Cuba was really the ideological motor always supporting Venezuela. But of course, Venezuela was the one with the resources to help Cuba. So the predictions weren't quite correct. But in terms of understanding where all of this is headed, well, you'll hear different, I would say, dogmatic leftists say, you know, Cuba's different than Venezuela, and they may be able to do that in Iran, but they can't do that here. What? What are you talking about? It's not realistic. A half-starved people cannot resist the largest armada, the largest military in the history of humanity, with the rest of the Western countries too cowardly. We see Spain, you know, Pedro Sanchez made some statements against the war on, you know, that's kind of like the most liberal of the European Union, but then they cave and end up going along with the attacks on Iran. I mean, how could a half-starved David ever stand up to this military Goliath? So this is prep work right now, the starvation campaign. Cuba would not have the weaponry, the advanced weaponry, the artificial intelligence, the drones. How could Cuba ever compete? We know that, Barack Obama's first promise when he took office on January 20th, I don't know how many people remember this, 2008, was that he was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
That never happened.
Yeah.
So just from Guantanamo, they have all of their spies, all of their CIA assets, and the Cubans have tried to work with them. The Cubans want peace, but they want full control. A lot of this is going to be in the hands of the Cuban government. I think there's a humanitarian view on this. Then, of course, there's the ideological view. The Cuban government has already said, well, we'll open up more. We'll open up more. They're completely willing to negotiate, but Washington and Miami don't want to negotiate. They want all of Cuba. They want to convert Cuba into another Dominican Republic where sex tourism and sex trafficking can flourish. And there's already sex tourism within Cuba. Rest in peace, rest in power. Michael Parenti, one of the great Marxist mentors of our time. But if you've read Parenti, he has this great quote where he says, all of the Soviet officials, they always told me there was no prostitution in the Soviet Union. But let me tell you, in my hotel, there was a lot of prostitution. So there may be, he was visiting Moscow and St. Petersburg. In my hotels and the hotels I went to, there was plenty of prostitution, even though there's no prostitution in the Soviet Union. It's very similar in Cuba. But, there's an old Marxist quote to build on that. What's the only thing worse than being exploited? Not being exploited. In other words, if you're exploited, at least you have some generation of funds to eat. If you're not exploited, if you're completely abandoned, and I can't tell you again, I know this is controversial and maybe the three of us will all be canceled again together, but you know how many young Cubans have told me, no me importa que sea un sweatshop. I don't care if it's a sweatshop. Come set up sweatshops. Then I can feed my children. We need sweatshops. I mean, that's how desperate they are. When you've been worn down and battered down for 36 years, I'm not saying that sweatshops are the answer. I'm just saying that by any means necessary, Cubans need to eat. And when they can't eat, what do? They take to the seas. They try to go to Nicaragua because there was an agreement between Nicaragua and Cuba for Cubans to be able to migrate to Nicaragua. And that was called, in Cuban slang, you call that viajando para ver los volcanes. I'm going to visit the volcanoes. That means you grab your backpack and you fly to Managua because those flights were opened up. This is back like 2002 and 3 and 4 post COVID. And hundreds of thousands of Cubans flew to Nicaragua to go see the volcanoes, and then immediately tried to head north to join their families in Miami or Houston. And that's part of the entire depopulation campaign. Things are very desperate in Cuba. It breaks my heart. Of course, I have a certain, anti-genocidal, anti-imperialist insomnia that plagues me. I think anyone who does this work, the human element of it hurts so much. And I saw these young 18, 19, 22, 23-year-old girls, and I talked to them, and they had their 70-year-old Italian boyfriend, and that boyfriend was leaving. And that was the only semblance of dignity, of food, of crumbs they had left. And those, boyfriends, those 67-year-old Canadians or whatever country they're from, every country in Europe, basically, the Czech Republic, every country except the U.S., though a lot of Miami Cubans will have these types of relationships too, based upon an exchange, of course, of foreign exchange for sex. And when that leaves, how do those young women feed their children and themselves? So they keep saying Cuba's on the border of collapse. Cuba was on the border of collapse in 1990. This is 36 years of collapse, 36 years of humanitarian situation, humanitarian crisis. And again, another critique. And I don't think it's wrong to critique. If we can't have these healthy critiques, are we part of the problem? And if we can't accurately sociologically describe what the 10.5 million people of Cuba are enduring, Well, I don't want to be a part of a conversation which just says, glazes over. And as people do die of malnutrition and hunger in the most isolated areas, and then we're going to publish articles because the Cubans know how to recycle and reinvent, and they're so heroic. And what the Cuban people tell me over and over, not the 65-year-olds, but they tell me we're sick of being heroic. We've been heroic for long enough. We want to be normal human beings with the right to work and eat and travel like anybody else.
Well, in my article that I never released, I was very critical of the Cuban government shutting down the whole island during COVID. I said, you're an island that's already dependent so much on tourism. What are you doing shutting this shit down? Nicaragua, there was like, hey, no lockdowns. Daniel Ortega said Nicaraguans got to eat. We're not locking down. It was totally two different ways of handling the situation. Cuba really, I mean, in a country that's already been heavily, blockaded, an embargo, sanctions, already struggling, you shut the whole place fucking down, and you really put on a crisis within your country. And when I go to Cuba, I bring a lot of baseball equipment, bats, balls, that kind of thing, because they can't get a lot of that stuff in there right now. And I don't think we talk about these kids. I'm trying to show these MAGA moms over here that are anti-communist that have kids that Cubans got kids too as well. Have some mercy over here, whatnot. But my question to you is this: what in your minds could the Cuban government have done maybe these last several years? Let's say since Diaz-Canel has been in there, and this is my last question: what could they have done differently that it might have been, regardless of the situation with the United States and knocking them out of the goal? What could they have done to make the situation better for everyday average Cubans?
Well,
that's a tough question, I know, because
I think about these things all the time, and I have these polemics with all of my Cuban family and friends, and it's an ongoing dialogue. I think the Cuban government continued to send nurses and doctors around the world to combat COVID, and they have done amazing things. I don't want anyone to think that I've given up on the Cuban project. The Cubans are, in a sense, going to fight as long as they can. They have an incredibly rich history. All of the medical internationalism, the 500,000 Cuban soldiers who went to Angola and who fought in Ethiopia and Guinea-Bissau, and Nelson Mandela said, we could have never defeated apartheid if it wasn't for Fidel Castro. And so I have this nuanced, understanding. And when I hear a lot of the, because I was in Miami, I had to fly back through Miami, and there was the massive blizzard in New York. So I was in Miami for a while, and they just have such a anti-communist, anti-Cuban, and it's just so, extreme, and they can't be just this conversation about the good things as well. What could they have done? I mean, very easy for me to retrospectively, I'm not the one facing the blockade and everything. Diversifying agriculture, they've done their best. I wish they could have gotten, more Chinese capital, more Russian capital in there. When I was in Cuba, not this trip, but a trip about 3 years ago, so many Cubans told me, you can say what you want about Vladimir Putin and the Russians and the Russian system and their contradictions. If it wasn't for Russia, we wouldn't have wheat. If it wasn't for Russia, we wouldn't be eating right now. And a lot of that because of the U.S. NATO war on Russia's political economic interests. Russia hasn't been able to send all of that aid. They're bogged down in their own quote unquote Vietnam quagmire, if you will. So we have to look at the global situation too to understand the limitations. But another very controversial thing that I can say, I mean, the left's already canceled me so many times, I don't think it's even a concern. But one thing that's always hurt me is often the Cuban state or the Cuban police, they won't criminalize the 75-year-old Italian sex tourist. They'll criminalize la mulata que tiene 20 años, que tiene que darle comer a sus hijos, to put it in Cuban slang to you. The police don't criminalize the sex tourists, the Johns, which is the debate unto itself, whether they should be criminalized. They criminalize the Cuban workers, the young Cuban women who are just trying to survive. So I think the Cuban state has got trapped. And of course, that was the entire function of the if you read the actual architectural language, the architecture of the blockade, the undersecretary under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson said it very deliberately. This is meant to provoke more hunger, more division, more despair. So post 1990, when Cuba's left on its own, I think that state in Miguel Parenti, I'm cubifying Michael Parenti's name, but Michael Parenti talks about this. The purpose of capitalism, the purpose of imperialism is to turn these socialist countries who are trying to breathe and produce. You know, Jose Marti always said, we pick up the rake by morning, we work the farms by morning, we pick up literature and poetry through the afternoon. All these countries who have Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Grenada, Bolivia, China, Soviet Union, Vietnam, Zimbabwe, Libya, Syria, all these countries with all of their contradictions have so much to offer us. We have to study everything. The treasure chest of anti-imperialist struggle, despite their contradictions that they offered us. I think there's so much of that within Cuba. The generation that's dying out now, unless they have family in Miami, like on one of my last interviews, even though it was an illegal interview, I'd love to tell you those stories one day, but there's many things I can't say on air. I interviewed the coordinator of the Afro-Cuban Cultural Center in Songolamaya, Cristo. These are the kind of the towns outside of Santiago. There's a rich history of Haitians being forced to come over to cut the sugar cane. So you have this rich history of Afro-Cuban and Haitian culture merging together. And I interviewed this woman, and she's the same age as my mom, about to be 75. And again, she spoke like with all the resistance, with all the fire that we're accustomed to from that generation. And it was so good to get her on recording, because these are all treasure chests that we can learn from. So we'll brainstorm about who we can get into Cuba to help journalistically in terms of the humanitarian help when we're off air.
Yeah.
And maybe chop it up again in the upcoming weeks. So a lot's going to be, Cuba's on the front lines. Will there be a military invasion of Cuba? The invasion of Cuba has already occurred. It began in the Raul Castro years, when they began to be flexible with foreign investment and foreign capital. Then in 2021, they passed the MIPIMES law. And so you already have this new power locus, this new power center. That's what, U.S. intelligence, the U.S. military, the billionaire interests are going to work through this private capital. Because when I was on them horses and I was waiting, trying to get here and here on public transportation, which is barely existent, they're down to the last trickles of oil. And of course, it's much worse now. I've been back for like a week now. But you would see, as you were waiting for these huge trucks, they'd put like 50 cattle in, but it's human beings, because it's the only way to get around. You would see a Ferrari whiz by you. You would see a BMW, an SUV whiz by you. That's the new power center. That's the new ruling class. That's the new bourgeoisie that's going to inherit the legacy of Fulgencio Batista, the counter-revolution prior to 1959, the 1958 period. And that's what they're going to do to Cuba. To what extent they'll just continue to drown and starve the Cuban people as a weapon of war, to what extent they'll need boots on the ground, to what extent they'll bomb, outmanned, outflanked, resourced Cuban military and police offices is really anyone's guess, but it will be a hybrid war on Cuba, as it has been since 1959. We saw the invasion last week of the Cuban Americans, who somehow thought, because of U.S. propaganda and the bounties they put on Hugo Chavez's head and Nicolas Maduro's head, they thought they could just invade through, I think it was through Camagüey or Santa Clara, two of the other provinces, and the Cuban people stood up. The Cuban government stood up, and they were neutralized, and they were put into jail. Could they try to use another Bay of Pigs type operation? Those are the different tactics they'll use. But the true bombs have been the bombs of hunger and this economic war, which is now crystallizing in this new, not emerging, but already stable new ruling class. Now, the big controversial question, which I don't think leftists would want to even have this conversation. To what extent, if this new ruling class has crept in economically in different stages over the last more or less generation, to what extent is its power crystallized and codified within the Cuban state already? And is that a fifth column that from within the Cuban state can try to emerge? They talked about Raul Castro's grandson, Sandro Castro, who's supposedly one of these guys with the fancy cars and has embraced capitalism. That's more or less the answer that I can give you as a firm supporter of the Cuban Revolution since I first went there in 1995.
Danny Shaw, thank you so much for spending extra time with us today. Guys, go watch his work. Go take a look at him. We know what the Americans are doing.
Gestapo tactics.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. We'll talk to
Appreciate
you later more about all this
Yeah,
stuff. And
we love you,
appreciate
brother.
having you on.
Practice your Spanish to get you in there, Pasta. Pa
¿Qué
que tú
pasa?
entiendes cuando te hablan. ¿Qué volá, Pasta? ¿Qué
No
volá?
problema, no problema. Un poquito de español. Gracias.
It's
Adios,
a shame.
mi amigo. Fam.
I mean Gestapo
Fam.
tactics.
Gestapo tactics,
Fam.
man.
Fam, let's get to it.
I
We
mean
still
Gestapo
have two
tactics.
other sections that we didn't begin. Yeah, so guys, all along the lines of what Danny's been talking about, right? Venezuela was targeted first. Venezuela had the oil. Venezuela was the one that was giving oil to Cuba. They have the resources that the United States wants. They have the gold that the United States wants. And so recently there was, of course, the invasion of Venezuela, the bombing, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, and then, of course, the diplomacy with Delcy Rodriguez. And I have a very nuanced view on this because I kind of like with Danny, I understand what a lot of these people in the United States don't understand. The left in particular, I'm talking about, they want to glorify, glossify the revolution and this idea of that, which is fine. And I believe in that 100%. I believe, just like Danny, in these ideas. The reality, though, is what you have to look at. The reality of things on the ground. It's very easy to say Delcy Rodriguez sold out. It's very easy to say, oh, they all sold out. They didn't fight. I want to know how many people in the United States, these people that are terminally online, revolutionaries online, would actually even withhold a fraction of the time that Venezuelans have held, that Cubans have held. Because the reality is they operated under a different time, under a different period, where things were a bit different. And that has to be taken into consideration. You always have to look at the material conditions of where you are. And that is Marxist textbook. Yeah. And when you live in an ideology where you're just looking at what you would like the world to be, and the world isn't that, you tend to just kind of glorify an idea that is not relevant and it's not even achievable for most people. So let's first, can you go to the tweet, Jayme? I want to read the tweet before we get to the document from Venezuela Analysis. Yes. Okay. So let's do that. There it is. So Venezuela Analysis is one of the outlets that has been consistently talking about the news from the government, right? Okay, so they said it's official. The U.S. and Venezuela are reestablishing diplomatic ties. The Venezuelan communique contains the recent spiel about cooperation and a mutually beneficial relationship. Washington insists on this phase process that ends with a democratic transition. Okay, we knew this was happening when Delcy Rodriguez and the Venezuelan government decided to open up dialogue with the United States. We knew this was happening. There's no way you can have dialogue with the United States and be Venezuela's position where they have your kidnapped president and have some sort of equitable relationship. And if you can make that bigger, scroll up, a statement on U.S.-Venezuela relations, the United States and Venezuela's interim authorities have agreed to reestablish diplomatic and consular relations. This step will facilitate our joint efforts to promote stability, support economic recovery, and advance political reconciliation in Venezuela. Our engagement is focused on helping the Venezuelan people move forward through a phased process that creates the conditions for a peaceful transition to a democratically elected government. The United States remains committed to supporting the Venezuelan people and working with partners across the region to advance stability and prosperity. This is all bullshit. We know that the United States doesn't give two shits about the Venezuelan people. We know that the United States wants the oil, the gold, wants the resources of Venezuela. This is the entire reason why anything was done. What they're talking about transitioning to a democratic government, that means removing the Chavistas. Okay, that's what that means, removing the Chavistas from power, and that they will do it. They will eventually do it because they already are inside the Venezuelan government. So let's go to the next one, the article, if you can put that up. So let's scroll down a little bit because this is just a little bit more information. So they're reestablishing diplomatic relations, blah, blah, blah. This step will facilitate our joint efforts, blah, blah, blah. If you can just scroll down a little bit. And after months of heightened tensions, the U.S. captured Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro in January, setting off a chain of changes in the country, including the swearing in of interim President Delcy Rodriguez. The two countries have since gradually resumed bilateral relations after Rodriguez's interim government expressed interest in rebuilding with Washington's with diplomatic missions, both countries following Maduro's capture. The Bolivarian government reaffirms its willingness to move forward to a new phase of constructive dialogue based on mutual respect, sovereign equality of states, and cooperation between our peoples, the Venezuelan government said in a statement shared on Thursday. This is what Venezuela is saying. Venezuela wants to have mutual respect. Venezuela wants to have an equitable relationship based on recognition of sovereignty. Venezuela is not going to get this equitable relationship based on sovereignty. Not from the United States, not from the Epstein class, not from Washington. They're never going to get it. This is not the way for Venezuela to achieve any sort of equitable relationship with the United States if it wants to keep its sovereignty. But this is the reality that Venezuela is facing right now. Because like Cuba, there's no way, and Venezuela has had way more of a capacity than Cuba. But like Cuba, Venezuela could not realistically go hand-to-hand combat with the United States. They couldn't. That's the reality. You can say, well, they should have all taken up arms and died fighting. That's fine. Maybe they should have. Maybe that's what would have happened, and then they would have all been dead. And where would that have gotten them? I'm not saying that I agree with what Delcy Rodriguez has done. I am saying I wouldn't want to be in her shoes. I mean, I don't know what other option they had. The ideological people who, people in Iran can speak. They can because this is how they are. They would go down fighting. Because the resistance access believes in martyrdom. This is what I'm trying to tell people. They have that belief, and I think a lot of the Venezuelan people were ready to die fighting against the United States in a ground-to-ground invasion. They were ready to go down with the fight. But the reality is the government wanted to protect its people. Nicolas Maduro wanted to protect his people. Now, is Delcy Rodriguez an opportunist? Is Delcy Rodriguez this or that? I think we need to stay away from just kind of making things up because we don't know. But what I do know is that her history says otherwise. I don't know if, she's some sort of naive leader. That's kind of what I'm looking at, is the way she's moving about this is actually the wrong way. It is too much too fast. It is too much complacency based on understanding who the United States is. And I want to get into that, but I want to hear what you have to say so far about this reestablishing of the connection, the embassy opening, and now, we're going to have the oil and gold, which I'll go into in a minute.
I mean, I don't know if there's much that I can say. You kind of laid it out that, there's a group of people who are ready to kill and fight. And it often makes me think about what Mossadegh did, right? Like Mossadegh was the leader of Iran, and he laid down and let the United States and the Brits come in, take their oil, unnationalize their oil at the time, put the Shah in place and stuff. But he didn't want to see deaths. He didn't want people killed. And even though people were ready to fight to the death, and we saw that they were armed, maybe there was some type of promise that, hey, Nicolas Maduro comes with us, you do relationships, we won't have a ground invasion, and we go from there. I mean, we don't know exactly what was put on the table, but there are going to be leaders out there, and Nicolas Maduro feels like one of those people who didn't want to see so many people slaughtered, because we know what the United States is capable of. These bombs, and we saw what happened. Everybody saw what happened in Gaza. He didn't want to see that for his people. And I don't know what Delsey's dealing with too as well. And fam, I am a little bit frustrated with a lot of these people. And there are these people, some of those people I told you, some of those conspiracy theorists that lean to the right, were making these opinions, not knowing or understanding anything of the region. They need to just shut the fuck up. Some of them, right? Like, oh my God, he gave over all this oil to all the Zionists right now, and they just gave on it, and Nicolas Maduro was in on it, definitely, or whatever. I mean, it's like
a lot of people need to shut the fuck up. I mean,
yeah.
You're speaking from the United States, especially. You have the squad. I'm not saying there aren't things to critique, but you have the squad. That's it. That's all you people have, or you have the MAGA. If you're looking at it from that side,
Well, yeah,
they're all captured. We don't have anybody in the United States. We can't even get people in the streets to protest against the war with Iran. We can get a couple hundred tops. We can't. We're in no position to speak about what Venezuela should or shouldn't have done. I am simply saying, from my perspective, they were literally between a knife and a rock. Literally, like the cliff and being bludgeoned. They really had no choice. There was no Russia or China joining in the fight, and they're not Iran. They don't have the weapons.
Yeah.
They don't have the centuries of experience.
Yeah.
They don't have. They're not in the geopolitical sphere where they affect the entire economy. They had more than Cuba does, so they were able to at least negotiate using that with the United States and somehow still keep the Chavistas in power. If you're looking at it from a real pragmatist way, that's how they're acting. And if let's go a little bit further, you look at China, what China's doing. China calls itself communist, yet they engage in capitalism more than anybody else in the world right now. They have literally engaged with Israel and traded with Israel more than anybody. Israel's like their number one importer of their goods. That hasn't stopped with the genocide. Why do they get a pass for being pragmatic? Why does Russia get a pass for having a relationship with Israel, for being pragmatic? I do feel like there's a different lens placed upon people in Latin America, where they're supposed to be perfect ideations of socialism, and when they're not, it's like, oh, they sold out. It's you're not talking about what China's done in Africa, what they did by selling weapons to the Saudis against Yemen, which is one of the most socialist places, by the way, the Ansarallah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean,
weapons to the UAE. Yeah.
They move for themselves and their economic expansion. That's fine. So does Russia. But why do they get a pass while you go and sit and say Delcy Rodriguez sold out? We know that the United States is not someone you make a deal with. This is the point. We know this. I'm not agreeing that they should make a deal. I am saying, what were they to do else? They didn't make a deal. They would have taken it by force anyway. I mean, Delcy. Okay, so let's go on, because this is the next thing, right?
By the way, I do want to make a comment though before you put this up, that even without all that being said, fam, and a lot of people would always accuse you of being a Russian bot, pro-Russian no matter what, pro-China, like some of the ideologues. And the fact that you're pushing back with some criticism, right? And Vanessa and you have been doing an amazing job showing China's role, right? Like it is a little bit, the best word, the American word to use is two-faced, right? Like you go to the UN, you sit there, you say, Israel needs to stop doing this. This is bad. This is terrible. But you don't stop the flow of goods that are actually being used to rebuild the places that they bomb. You're part of the whole system itself. But I do want to point out as well that it's still, when it comes to being an American and holding America accountable, that is your first duty, because it is your country. And it's like when you say, clean your own house first, worry about your own family first. I still agree with that. And I also want to point out that despite us seeing what China and Russia are doing. Seeing Vladimir Putin shake Giuliani's hand was a knife in the heart. It really was. It's like, Jesus Christ, we're there and stuff. They're still not at the level of accountability on what the West does as far as bombing, starving people out, sanctions, whatnot. What Israel and the United States does is still the main aggressor on this global planet. And yes, China and Russia have some responsibilities and some answers that we definitely need from them, but they're still not at the level of bringing upon death and destruction that the United States and Israel does. So I do want to point that out too as well. There's a difference. They're still the main aggressors. The main fucking problem is still the West, the United States, and Israel. I still want to point that out.
The reason Russia and China even have these problems is because they want to seek to be at the level of the United States and NATO. So they feel like they have to keep up. And that's part of the whole thing. Like the surveillance state, the AI stuff, that's coming for Russia. That's already in China. And that's in the United States and Europe and all of that. So the most developed countries, so to speak, are doing that. They're doing the Agenda 2030. There's going to be hardly any country that's not going to be on board with that. So there is no like socialist utopia. There is no like movement right now where that's happening. This is the age of normalization, and I've talked about this numerous times. The pragmatism is winning over any sort of solidarity, any sort of international, even BRICS. BRICS itself is modeled after the UN Charter. Like they're not modeled after any sort of revolutionary thing. They're modeled after the UN Charter. So if you're talking about BRICS, it just means more seats at the table for China and Russia and the Saudis and India, but everybody else that's not strong enough is not really going to have more equity. They're not really going to benefit from it. So that's the reality. Regarding back to Venezuela, let's go through this. The Trafigura, Venezuela mining firm, also signed a deal for up to 1,000 kilograms of gold. This is for the United States, and this was March 4th. Let's scroll down, Jayme. So right here, Venezuela's state-owned mining company has signed a multi-million-dollar deal to sell as much as 1,000 kilograms of gold door bars to commodities trader Trafigura for U.S. markets. Axios reported on Wednesday, citing two sources. The deal requires Venezuelan mining companies Minervan to furnish 650 to 1,000 kilograms of gold door bars to Trafigura, adding that Trafigura will ship the gold to refineries under a separate arrangement with the United States government. And so the White House official confirmed the deal in a statement. And this is when the U.S. Interior Secretary Doug Bergman, who Delcy Rodriguez was with, arrived in Venezuela on Wednesday, helped secure it. This is historic gold deal. This historic gold deal between Trafi and Venezuela has been in the works at President Trump's direction. We are helping Venezuela restore their mining sector, which will help American industry get the minerals we need. They're telling you right there what this is about.
Yeah.
This isn't about Venezuela. The mining sector Venezuela already had. It was just being sanctioned. It was being blockaded. But now the United States comes in and is saving Venezuela. No, they're going to reroute those minerals, the wealth of the country, to the United States. This is absolutely dismal for Venezuela, for the entire region. This is absolutely sad.
Will they get any
Catastrophic,
money
really.
from this though, fam? Is this, it's not like we're going to pay top dollar for it. I think we want it at a good price. But is this going to help financially at all with Venezuela?
I think it has to help financially because they have to make it look like it helps financially. But no, overall, especially in the long run, the majority of the mining and all of that is going to go out of the country towards multinational private corporations, just like it does in Peru. And just like it will even more so in Bolivia and Argentina and all of that. Like this is the whole plan. This is literally right in line with this new plan Condor that is pretty much re-emerging, but towards a more technocratic end, right? So again, this is a lot. If Delcy Rodriguez had another choice, she should have taken it. However, we do know that she is under a hidden indictment, and I want to definitely go through that, Jayme. If you can just go to the next thing, there's a couple more things I want to get through. For some reason, my documents folder isn't pulling up. So let me see where we're at. So there's a couple of different opinions. This is the left ideologue perspective, and I wanted to read it because I wanted you guys to hear it in comparison to mine and in comparison to the others. This is the left perspective that's saying, don't criticize anything Venezuela is doing. Venezuela is doing the right thing. I'm not with this perspective either. I'm not with either of those sides. So this is from People's Dispatch. For left forces outside Venezuela, the current moment demands clarity about what solidarity means. Manuel de los Santos debunks the mistaken claims of betrayal in the Bolivarian Revolution and how the people of Venezuela and its government have been resisting the U.S. imperialist onslaught. So basically, this little picture on the right, it says, since January 3rd, so-called experts and pundits across the political spectrum have tried to sell the claim that regime change has succeeded in Venezuela, arguing the operation's success indicated treason at the highest levels of the Bolivarian Revolution. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez and the remaining leadership have abandoned the Bolivarian project and socialist transformation, surrendering the country, its economy, and its resource to U.S. imperialism. In foreign relations, the Venezuelan leadership has abandoned its historic anti-imperialism. Next, I think there's another picture. There's a couple of them that I want to kind of read through if you can get to them. So this is from the opinion that, you know, it's a lie, that Venezuela didn't sell out, that they're still following the Bolivarian revolution, that they're still actually, you know, trying to, in a way, succeed. These claims are false, reflecting an amateurish and superficial approach to politics, reactive hot takes. I agree with that. They are hot takes rather than real analysis or investigation. I agree that the people saying Delcy sold out and that's it are not giving real analysis, which provides a left-wing echo of Trump's own presentation. I agree with this too, because if you're just going to shit on Venezuela while they're down, you're not really helping the situation. A close look at the facts will prove that we are witnessing is not a surrender, but a tactical retreat in the face of overwhelming force, for which there are clear analogies in revolutionary history. I don't think this is the most tactical thing that I've ever seen, but this is a claim one. The success of the U.S. operation on January 3rd indicated treason at the highest levels of the Bolivarian Revolution. I have got straight from people within the Venezuelan government that there was not treason at the highest levels of the revolution. So I tend to believe those people. They're not sources that are just blind, but I do think deals were made, right? Why it's false. Contrary to the narrative imposed by Western media and repeated mindlessly by some on the left, there was fierce resistance. 32 Cuban combatants and 50 Venezuelans were killed who defended the president with their lives. That right there is true. There was a lot of people that were actually completely and totally, fought to the end for Venezuela, right? And the second claim, if you can go to that one, Jayme, I want to go to that one.
Yeah.
Acting President Delcy Rodriguez and the remaining leadership have abandoned the Bolivarian project, surrendering the country, its economy, and resources to U.S. imperialism. They have surrendered in a way through this diplomatic action that they've taken because the United States acts like this. But that I don't think that was the intent. Okay, I don't think that was the intent. Since January 3rd, the correlation of forces has been fundamentally altered. The U.S. Navy's largest regional armada in history remained positioned off Venezuela's coast. No one is coming to Venezuela's assistance, and the agreements taking shape between Caracas and Washington represent a bitter but necessary compromise. I think it was necessary in the sense of, like, they had either that choice or to fight. And as they said, nobody was coming to Venezuela. Nobody was going to help Venezuela. Okay. Like, we could all say, no, we wouldn't give up. We would just die fighting. But when the hour comes, very few people would actually do that. And I can guarantee that reality. And I don't know if that's it or if there's one more. In foreign relations, the Venezuelan leadership has abandoned its historic anti-imperialism. The reality is that Venezuela remains under the gun, which is true, and wants to preserve its Qatari relationship, which has played a particularly important role for Venezuela in recent years, hosting its sovereign wealth funds, controlling Venezuelans' access to its old revenue, and mediating and hosting the last rounds of U.S.-Venezuela negotiations. The United States was always going to use the Gulf states, not just against Iran, but against Venezuela. The United States knew what they were doing when they were talking to Saudi Arabia. This is part of their project. Use the Gulf states to disarm Iran and Venezuela. So this is no surprise. Venezuela is also pretty much threatened by the Gulf states, so has to work with them. And again, is also threatened by the United States. For the left forces outside Venezuela, the current moment demands clarity about what solidarity means. It does not mean endorsing or defending each and every statement of the Venezuelan government, nor does it mean demanding that the Venezuelan leadership commit suicide in a gesture of revolutionary purity or honor. It does not mean echoing U.S. propaganda about splits and traitors without evidence. Agree with that last part. Does not mean measuring every tactical decision against an abstract standard that no revolutionary project in history has ever met. I mean, again, they were able to have the Bolivarian Revolution for a long time, and we have nothing. Solidarity means understanding that Delcy Rodriguez, sitting face to face with the representatives of an empire that has long targeted her own family, is engaged in the most difficult kind of revolutionary work, survival under conditions of maximum duress with the future of 30 million people on the line. You're not just talking about your ideas and your ideology, you're literally talking about millions of people and their lives. The fact that millions of people were already starving in Venezuela, millions of people already had issues having food on the table. The fact that all of this is already happening, and then you have the United States holding a gun to your head. Those are realities. It's not. I'm not excusing any sort of diplomacy with the U.S., and I'll tell you why in a second. But I am saying that is a reality. It is a choice that was made based on a raw reality that people in the United States, a lot of people making these claims, have never faced in their lives and may never face in their lives. You may never be in that situation, and consider yourself lucky, because a lot of people I know, a lot of my friends around the world are in those situations, have been in those situations their whole lives, on the receiving end of sanctions, on the receiving end of bombs, and they have had to make those decisions themselves. So you can be as pure and you can be as revolutionary as your keyboard lets you on Twitter, but there's a difference when you are hungry and when your family's starving and when you need to make a decision based on a whole amount of people in the country. Who am I to say that that decision wouldn't be made in a different way than I would think it in my position now, from the comforts of the West, or the comforts of having an American passport. So those are a couple things I want to say.
Who wrote this here, by the way? Is this Manolo stuff?
This is Manolo, and I don't agree with Manolo on a lot of things, but some of the points here
he made a lot of
were
great
actually
points.
Accurate and agree, and that I would say we could agree with those. Okay, if you want, we can go on to the next one, because I guess I'll read this last part. The revolution has not ended. It has temporarily retreated or grouped, and it's fighting by other means. The breathing space purchased through these negotiations, however costly, provides conditions for future advances. I don't know if I would say the revolution hasn't ended. I do think that it has. I mean, I think as you knew it, it's over. So I don't agree with that. I think this is it for me, what I'm looking at what's happening realistically. Venezuela, it's going to take a minute for them to get anything back under the current conditions that we're in. There's no, like, the Chavistas will be removed from power. The way I'm looking at it, the Chavistas movement will still be there in the streets, and the people who believe in it and all of that. They have a strong. That's the thing about Venezuela. They have a strong belief, even in the youth, kind of like Nicaragua. They have that belief. They have that system. But a lot of people have been wanting reform for a long time, guys. It's the same thing that we saw in Cuba, the same thing that we saw, that we see in Iran even. But it's about sovereignty. People don't like it when you bomb their country and kidnap their president. Like, that brings people together. So the United States doing that has actually turned off a lot of people from the opposition. That is true. The Chavistas are in power. They can negotiate more. But at the end of the day, the ones who are pulling the strings are clearly the United States. If you can't help your ally Cuba get oil, it's because you don't have the reins of your government. If the United States tells you no and you obey, then you're not in charge. And that's a reality that I think these people on, Manolos of the world have to face. They're not in charge. So you can say that the Chavistas are still there, but are they the ones that have the power to make the shots? No. To call the shots? No. They don't. So I think there's a little bit too much glossing over that aspect on this end. And yeah, Nicolas Maduro sits in a jail cell. There's a team of lawyers from the opposition trying to get him on other charges so he can even get the death penalty. So this isn't a joke. The United States wants to get rid of Nicolas Maduro. And so I don't agree with this. The point is not to die for the revolution, but to live and make the revolution. I don't agree with that because I think some people are willing to die for it. And I think that in other circumstances, there is value in that. For Iran, for example, it's existential. There is value in dying for that. The people are willing to do that. There is value in that. There's a chance to do something about it. In Venezuela, there was no chance to do anything about this. I mean, realistically, you're not going to go against trillions of dollars of an entire defense industry if you're Venezuela. Like that was just not a reality. So I think there's a nuanced view of all of this. Anything you want to say, Fan, before I continue?
Yeah, well, let me just say this much, that, to add on to where I can make a comment about what this means to the politics in the United States, because what you're going to see right now over the next couple of years as the political posturing from the left is that you're going to hear people like Gavin Newsom come around and say, well, I'm going to change the way things are done over there, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. They're going to seem more sympathetic. And he's going to make a lot of independents or left-leaning independents and lefties in America feel as if he's the obvious choice over the conservatives and the Republicans and Donald Trump who did this. But it's going to just be what it was with Barack Obama, the way it was with Joe Biden and stuff, is that they're going to keep everything in place that was there beforehand. In other words, they might do some things that will be considered a virtue signal of sorts of, hey, we're allowing more flights to go into Venezuela. We're letting remittance open back up, whatnot. But the strong arm American imperialist forces will still be in play when any Democrat comes in power. Don't kid yourself to think that if you're voting for Gavin Newsom, you're going to help Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or Honduras in this way. You're not. They might not be as heavy-handed as Donald Trump is in Latin America. Obviously, we have the whole situation in Russia, Ukraine, which was started completely under Joe Biden, right? I mean, at least the serious killing of the Donbass, the citizens of the Donbass. So don't think for a second that the Democrats are going to come in and are going to reverse everything that's going to happen. They're going to release Nicolas Maduro or whatever the case may be, and they're going to be singing in the streets and everything's going to go back to the way it was beforehand. It's not going to happen. The reason why Donald Trump was able to do what he was able to do in Venezuela is because the Democrats held their end of the bargain of the imperialist forces, of the blockade, of the sanctions and whatnot. There were little minimal areas in which he opened up things in Cuba, Joe Biden, right? Flights, remittance, all that stuff. But they were still minimal. The sanctions were still on. And in fact, they were imposed even harder. So don't think that the Democrats are going to come around and change this situation. It's going to be better than Donald Trump. It's not Republican versus Democrat as far as the treatment goes in Latin America. It's the imperialist establishment forces versus what the people want, right? And unfortunately, the majority of the people here in the United States are okay with this stuff because they use the term evil socialist dictator. And he's not a dictator. The elections in Venezuela are much more sound than ours. The Chavistas won a lot of local elections showing that they have support. He's an elected official. He's a government. It's like Mohammed Morandi, what he said. They love to use the term regime. Well, it might be a softer approach from the left, the Democrats in the United States, but we're not going to get any justice for the Chavistas and Venezuelan people, everyday people, even if a Democrat gets in power. The establishment and the military forces will still, the empire forces will still reign supreme over Venezuela. So don't think that that's going to be helping them out. If we want to do anything, we have to change real policy, not real parties. Sorry, fam.
No, and these people like the Manolos and stuff are, some of them might ultimately vote Democrat because they think it will be the right approach. I wouldn't, of course, because it's not going to. Pasta's right. So this is from Margaret Kimberly, and this is what I want to get to as well. Stop asking why Delcy Rodriguez does or says what the U.S. wants. They are holding a secret indictment over her head and threatening to give her the same treatment meted out to Nicolas Maduro. So let's look at what the gray zone put out the Trump DOJ crafted a secret indictment of the Venezuelan president, Delcy Rodriguez. This is known, and it was actually then recently published by the New York Times. And so they're holding this indictment over her head, and they're going to execute it if she derails, according to the top opposition journal. See, this is where I don't think being blackmailed or allowing yourself to be blackmailed is the best thing you can do. Unfortunately, I don't know how much of a choice they have, but for me, it's I wouldn't allow myself to be blackmailed, even if that meant I would go to jail. I don't think I could personally allow myself to be blackmailed like this. I would say, you know what, I'll go to jail. Somebody else is going to have to take the reins, and I'll talk about this more in a second. So this is what's going on here. Let's hear what more about this indictment.
You know, she's sanctioned. She has been sanctioned since 2017. She and her brother.
Can we take the
by the U.S., by the European Union, but she doesn't have, let's say, an open and formal investigation against her. One of the information we manage is that U.S. is holding an indictment against her to make it public. Just in case he derails.
They have it over her head.
Yeah. So I think she and her brother, they are on this survival mode, and they will have the capacity to move the pieces as long as the U.S. back her up.
Okay, so.
You there, fam?
Yeah, I'm here. So this is happening to Delcy Rodriguez, right? Okay, and I wanna give you my response to this whole situation, because imagine you're Delcy Rodriguez, and you're like left with the entirety of the weight of the country of Venezuela is in your hands, and you have to make a decision. And Maduro laid out this plan, right? Because the Venezuelans did have a plan. They had a plan of secession in terms of, you know, she would take over if Maduro wasn't there. They put this out. Like, we don't know exactly the intricacies and the mechanisms the way this happened, but we do know that Maduro had laid out plans in case he were to be, you know, kidnapped, or in case he were to be captured by the United States, because this was a plan. And if you can go to the next one, Jayme, I want to point out some of the things that Delcy Rodriguez has done. And this is like the sides that are like accusing her of just everything under the sun, right? So Joe says Delcy has surrendered to the Nazis in Washington. The U.S. has its foot on the throat of her government, which is flat on its back. This enraging spectacle, in my opinion, largely a fault of China and Russia, but also, of course, the cowardice of regional governments like Brazil and Mexico. So a reality that I will agree with him that he pointed out.
Yeah.
Venezuela is alone. Nobody in the region, in Latin America, neither Brazil or Mexico, that are progressive governments, or Colombia, have come to the aid of Venezuela, have said, we will stand with you, Venezuela. We will protect your sovereignty. That's what should happen, okay? That's what should happen. You should have some sort of block. The United States does something and says, hey, don't give them oil. Everybody else falls in line. But if it happens the other way around, nobody comes. You can't have a chance at some sort of revolutionary change when you don't have literal resistance or solidarity. You know, you see that resistance with Iran, with Hezbollah, with Ansarallah, with Iraq, and the Hamas, and the forces of resistance that come together. You don't see it in Latin America. Okay, we don't have that, but we're basically pretty much captured, right? And so there was nothing that Venezuela could do to really get out of this. So can you click on the tweet under it, Jayme? Let's read what Delcy Rodriguez has said.
Yeah.
Because it is truly nauseating for me to read this. I mean, I thank President Donald Trump for the kind willingness of his government to work together on an agenda that strengthens binational cooperation for the benefit of the peoples of the United States and Venezuela. She has to know this is a lie, right? She has to be like, unless she's an actual sellout, which I can't even, like, we can't, it's a waste of time arguing about that, because literally We don't have the information to know. And at this point, it doesn't matter. Based on the information that I got, she wasn't. That, you know, this is all being done because of saving herself and you know, saving the little bit of Venezuelan the control that Venezuela can have. But let's say she's not. Even saying this, everybody knows it's a lie. Like everybody, including her own people, right? So saying that the Donald Trump, the guy who just literally bombed your country and kidnapped your president, is kind. I mean, nobody believes this. Even after she got bombed, she started speaking out against this. So there's clearly something going on where she feels her life is in danger. And that lady from this last Gray Zone video kind of lays it out. Like she, you know, they have an indictment, but I think even more than the indictment, there was a report that she was threatened that she would be taken out like Maduro was. Okay. And not everybody is going to be like, all right, so take me out. You know, not everybody is Gaddafi. Not everybody is going to be that Hugo Chavez revolutionary. Okay. Or Che Guevara, who's like, you know, I'm going to die. I'm going to face you. I'm going to get, not everybody's like that, guys. Okay. So to expect people to just be like that is another thing. Why is this up?
Jayme.
Okay. So the next one.
Can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah.
Maybe she is that way because of what happened with Gaddafi, what happened with the people of Libya, right? Like you say, I mean, look what happened. You know, I'm saying,
Yeah.
I don't really take offense to this. This doesn't make me go, oh my God, what a fucking sellout. Maybe she's just playing ball. We don't know exactly what's in store right now. You know what I'm saying? And so many things could change. Even though the United States has got control of Venezuela, it seems, and they're playing ball, who knows what's in the works? You know what I'm saying? But I do think when it came to that statement, the fact that there is no help regionally, right? Somebody put up Mexico is still a puppet of the United States. I don't know. I think Claudia Sheinbaum is still dealing with the situation in her own government. You know,
See, I hate that shit. That's exactly what I hate. Mexico is still a puppet of the United States. What do you mean by that? Why do you say that? Give me the evidence of that. Oh, give me some examples of why they're a puppet of the United States. Like, what do you mean? What constitutes a puppet? See, it's this reductive, like, just blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no analysis in that. There's no objective, you know, anything in that. Sorry, it's just,
well,
it's the
I think
same
a new
type
leader
of
comes
rhetoric.
in, fam, right? A new leader comes in, and there might be some minimal change, but the existing, government,
Structure.
it's been there for quite some time. The system's been there for a while. So there are people, who are not necessarily elected that both within the United States have a lot of power, within Mexico that have a power, been there for quite some time. They've been working and dealing together for so long. So you can't expect like Claudia Sheinbaum or AMLO to come in to wave a magic wand and change all that.
Yeah.
There are factions within the governments, with the United States, within their deep state, within our deep state, that will still work together, right? You know what I'm saying? And when I say deep state, I'm not starting to say shadowy government. I'm trying to say unelected officials that are in positions of power that have worked within the Pentagon, the American government for quite some time. Same thing in Mexico. And it's just really hard for, somebody to come in, wave a magic wand and change all that. However, you would think, though, fam, there would have been some support from Lula and Sheinbaum a little bit more to Venezuela to stop this from happening. And that did not happen, but we don't know exactly why. And, it could be, once again, Delcy Rodriguez trying to save her own people's lives. Because when you do mention Gaddafi, he was like, come on, remove me. Well, what's going on with Libya now? There's an actual slave trade. People have died. Thousands of people have died. So the same way that Mossadegh said, I don't want to see my people die, maybe Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez made a deal and said the same thing. Let's find a way to get some people some food, maintain some integrity, have some form of sovereignty, but let's end this right now. I mean, they're literally blowing up boats of fishermen in the water right now. And this is going to shut everything down, and we're going to lose everything. So unfortunately, the gun was to their head, and maybe they made a decision not just for their own lives, but for their people's lives. We don't know. And I get what you're saying, fam. As I'm glad you brought this to the table today.
Yeah, and the thing is, what can Mexico and Brazil do also when there's no established, because you got to think of government as bureaucracy. There's no established defense pact between, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. There's no established defense pact. Like, these are the things that need to be established, unfortunately. Like NATO has established a bloc. Where's the bloc? You guys want to do a bloc? That's the only way you do things. You can't just say, oh, we're going to join this and that. These governments aren't going to take the risk of going at the United States over this. Like, people fear that what the United States has done. They've literally taken down countries like bomb by bomb. They're not just going to go in and try to do something without like some sort of plan. We don't have these idealistic leaders right now in power. It's mostly progressive, like Lula and Claudia Sheinbaum, who are trying to really work within what they have, the conditions that they have, and do whatever improvements they can. They're not out there waving this communist flag and saying, we're just going to take down the US empire. Nobody is. Nobody, not China, not Russia, not anybody is waving the flag in any government right now saying we're going to take down the United States. The only one that's coming close to it, and not even that, because Iran doesn't want to take down the United States. They just want death to America, means they want to just get rid of the US empire, the imposition on the sovereignty. They're the closest ones that are remotely close to doing that. Everybody else doesn't have that ideology. And they don't have the means either to do it. So here is this is the video of her thanking Trump. So let's just play the video. And this is from a MAGA person posting it.
Well, of course, yeah.
Quiero igualmente agradecer al presidente de los Estados Unidos, Donald Trump.
I want to thank the
En medio
president
de
of the
nuestra
United
reunión,
States, Donald Trump.
Escribió un post, saludando lo que es esta agenda de trabajo entre el gobierno de los Estados Unidos y el gobierno de Venezuela. Como lo habíamos
This agenda of work
mencionado y
between the
resaltado,
government of Venezuela
el
and the
gobierno
United
de
States.
Venezuela está a la disposición para, a través de los
The
canales
government
de
of Venezuela
cooperación,
is
Jayme, lower
open
it.
to
agendas concretas que
cooperation
beneficien
channels
tanto al pueblo de los Estados Unidos como
that
al
will
pueblo de
benefit
Venezuela.
both
El
the people
secretario
of the
también
United States
ha
and the
venido
people of
acompañado de
Venezuela.
una nutrida e importante representación empresarial. Quiero
This is
igualmente
an important moment for
agradecer
representation. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's nauseating to a lot of us who understand Bolivarianism and Chavismo and the revolutionary spirit that it meant. You don't bow down to these people. Yankee, go home. You don't ever make a deal with them. But the reality is much different. And I explain it here in this tweet. And then I just want to move on from this because we've been here for a freaking long time. So I lay it out, right? So we know Delcy Rodriguez has an indictment against her. We know that Maduro is in a grave situation. And like a lot of the people in Venezuela want him back. So they're doing a lot of things to get him back. Is it the most important thing pragmatically to get him back? No, right? But they want to get him back. We know that Venezuela has a gun to their head, meaning that if they don't follow these rules, then things might be even worse. It's like you have a gun to your head. If you do everything we tell you, then we won't kill you. Okay? We're just going to rape you. And we're just going to, take a couple things, but we'll let you live. But you can't stray. That's literally what's happening right now to Venezuela. If you can scroll down a little bit. We also know Venezuela could not have possibly fought alone against the best U.S. military. Of course not. So it was either fight or the dangerous diplomacy that always felt with Washington favoring the empire. Like I said, I don't want to be in her shoes, and I am empathetic to her situation. But this is the difference here that I have a problem with. We, meaning us right now as Americans, as U.S. citizens, we know that when you give in to the United States, they look down on you as being weak. They know that they can get whatever the hell they will out of you. So ultimately, when any country opens up the doors of diplomacy with the United States, what ends up is that the efforts to please them will be in vain because they're going to betray you anyway. They're going to kill you anyway. They're going to take everything. They're going to leave you with nothing. Okay? And then what's going to happen, that's already happening right now in Venezuela, even from the most loyal Chavistas, is your people turn against you. Because simultaneously, as you're trying to please the United States, who will never be pleased by you because they think less of you and they will never change their mind, this government structure as it is, your people will look at you as weak, as cowardly, like you have no spine. And so you end up pleasing nobody, which is exactly what the United States wants. They want you in a weak position. They want people to not like you. And they want you to not have these resources like you had them before. So it's kind of like the perfect chess move. They got you both ways. You've lost the game. You can't win because no matter what she does, she's screwed. Because if she were to fight the United States, things would go down terribly, but she would have the backing of the people, and at least she could die. She's not, willing to go there, whatever the case may be. At least they can salvage something if they're, enacting some diplomacy for the future. So there you go.
Yeah.
So my question, my whole point is like, it doesn't matter, how much you negotiate with the United States. It never ends well, guys. And if Venezuela thinks they can be the exception, so be it, right? If they think that maybe they can manipulate things so once Delcy's gone or once somebody comes in, they can get the government back, more power to them if they think they can do it. It hasn't been done. It has not been done by anybody like in this way. Usually the United States always wins and they take everything. In my opinion, the duty of an official is always to their people first. And I think that is actually the duty to an official, and it's not to their own self-preservation. So if you're an official and you're a president of a country and you're in danger, your life is in danger, it doesn't matter. Your personal life, all these things, that's what it takes to be a politician, actually. You're a public servant, a public servant. Your personal issues, everything regarding your livelihood should be placed aside. You should look to the people. And on top of that, you should have a movement of secession. You should have things laid out. This movement, this idea of these movements is much bigger than one person. Like, for example, they killed Ali Khamenei. What happens? There's already like 5 of them to replace him. That's how you do things, okay? And again, with the United States, you never show weakness or complacency. We don't look that as a win. We look at it as weakness. We look at it, when you say you want diplomacy, we look at it as we gotcha. You're under our control now. If you show weakness like that, complacency to the United States, that you've already lost because they already view you as less than. So they're not going to change their mind. So again, in my opinion, if you're not willing to sacrifice yourself for your people, then you're not fit to be a leader with such power. And I think we are seeing an excessiveness of from Delcy, where she's just going way too out. And a lot of people are turning against her, a lot of her own Chavista people. If you go through the comments, it's not just like Americans or dumb, Westerners, whatever. It's literally people who supported her, who supported the Chavista government. These are realities. Unfortunately, she's not winning. And so now Venezuela is going to be in a position where people are angry at the Venezuelan government, not just on the opposition, but on the Chavista side. And that's not a good situation to be in when the United States is taking in. So unfortunately, that's the reality of where Venezuela's at.
Fam, I don't know if we have time to do the last section. It's like 2 hours and 40 minutes into this. I don't know if you want to end here or if you want to blitzkrieg through the other stuff.
Yeah. You know what? Let's just put the first, I guess. Let me see if there's anything. I just want to mention something. We can save it for Monday.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that, yeah, you can show the first 2 tweets. Israel's been bombing Lebanon. The first 3, actually. So Israel's been bombing Lebanon. This isn't Gaza. This is Lebanon. And you can just play the videos while I talk. And so lower the volume so we can get through these really quickly. So what Danny was saying, the south of Beirut, these areas, they're being bombed right now. They're being attacked. They have been. And they wanted the Kurds to move in, but that's not happening quite the way they wanted to. But the Takfiris are coming in from Syria. That is happening. And again, this is this is what's happening in Lebanon. They're evacuating a school. And the evacuation order that was placed, I want to highlight that, and we'll talk more about it on Monday. The evacuation order is essentially another Nakba, and this is a tweet by Code Pink is the next one. They're basically telling people in all of these districts to get out, and if they don't get out, they're gonna bomb them anyway. So they're gonna bomb them anyway, but they're gonna die. So Israel is trying to expel hundreds of thousands of Lebanese civilians from their homes. This is not a buffer zone or an evacuation zone. This is forced displacement under threat of bombing. With U.S. support, Israel seeks to permanently depopulate and occupy southern Lebanon. This is literally textbook Abraham Accords, Greater Israel. This is exactly the plan. Why are they issuing these evacuation orders? They're not being kind. They're not warning people to go, and then we're going to bomb you and that's it. They're going to bomb these areas no matter what, because they want the entire south of Lebanon. They want to take the area south of the Litani River, and what they will do is once they bomb, they will have troops move in, ground troops, and they will have the Takfiris also move in, and they will ambush Lebanon. And what's ended up happening is the government of Lebanon has basically said, hey, help us, to France, said, hey, we don't want this to be a part of this anymore, and we're going to criminalize any association with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the only thing standing between them and death, by the way. So the Lebanese government, as I've said before, is not representative of Hezbollah, right? Or vice versa. So it's really a bad situation, because if Israel gets their way, basically they'll capture Lebanon like the occupied West Bank. Right. So think about it that way.
At the very least, South Lebanon will fall into Israel's hands no matter what now at this point, it seems like.
Unless Hezbollah fights, and from what I know, they are going to fight. So
yeah, because
regular people have guns. Like they like everyday people, like you'll see a mother, you'll see regular civilians, they'll pick up a gun and they'll just start fighting. That's resistance.
Lebanon.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about it Monday, guys. We want to thank you all for joining in today. If you haven't gone over to our Give, Send, Go, please do so. We had on Professor Danny Shaw talking about making trips to Cuba and all that other things. We have a lot of things on the dock, guys. We have a lot of stories to cover. We want to thank you all for joining back in today. Remember, we're not getting the bells. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, we'd like to donate to Cuba as well. We'd like to, if we can go there, if at least Pasta can go or something, we'd like to bring some supplies. I know there's a flotilla there that's going. So
the thing I like to do, guys, I like to show up at the baseball fields, and I have some connections in Havana. Actually met somebody who was at one of my Airbnbs whose stepfather happened to be oversaw 3 Little League All-Star Havana teams. And they're getting, strangled out. And it's kind of crazy because you'll see some actual Major League Baseball players come from these areas. And now they're like using next to nothing to swing the bat. Jayme did the video. We talked about building bridges with baseball. I have right now, and I just got to get over to Cuba. I have right now almost 50 baseball bats. I think I got like 40 baseball bats. I think I got 75 gloves. I have over 200 baseballs, gloves. And then I go there and I also give the parents some money and stuff, right? Like we go and we give the parents some money and stuff so they could, and you can see this kid, he was just, it lights them up. You know what I'm saying? When you give them the baseball gloves and everything, you know what I'm saying? They love the sport. I've always said these people, they feel like symbiotically connected to us. And, I want to be able to go there. You look at these kids, you know what I'm saying? You talk to the parents, you know what I'm saying? And it's part of the activism I love to do. And I'd love to go over there and bring, I have, like I said, it's sitting right now inside a storage unit, all that equipment. And I'd like to bring more. And I'd like to bring a few bucks. And you know what I'm saying? It's just, I'd like to help out as much as they can. Look at the field. Look at the conditions of the field. This is a place, you want to talk about heart and desire, where Major League Baseball players come from. And it's one of their only way out. It's their only way they see that, feeding their families or the people close to them. So I want to be able to go do that again. And I just want to hear from them. I want to get the stories from them again. You know what I'm saying? There's me taking a picture with one of the teams and stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I'd love to be able to do this again and help out right now. What we'll do is I'll get a separate fund for maybe getting more baseball equipment together. But right now, this is for you to travel and do what we need to do. Yes, fam.
I think whatever bats you have are great, but I do think like they need like more than ever now because of the situation. I think they probably need like more things like basics, like toothpaste.
We'll bring that too. I bring that too. We bring that too.
Because I just the way things are, I think it's not
landlord,
like it was before.
The fuck? I mean, I don't want to read the chat. There's so many stupid people in there. Yeah, I mean, no, I'd like to bring that. I bring that stuff too. I bring sneakers for the kids, toothpaste, deodorant, aspirin, all that stuff. We bring that stuff too as well. But you got to be careful what you're going over there with too as well, right? So you don't want to get too much because you don't want to get red flagged too much. For some reason, I've never gotten any problems with the baseball stuff going over, So I don't know. I mean, I want to try to do as much as we can, and believe you me, and like you said, fam, when they need the basic stuff now, right? Okay. But when you're helping these kids do what they got to do, they can actually, they come to the States eventually. They play baseball. They make a lot of money, and they can go back and help out a lot more people than I'm capable of helping out. A Major League Baseball salary for some of these Cuban kids that get over there, and they get them. They get them, right? You can help them, put them in a position where they can help their family even more than what we can do right now. So, I want to continue to do that stuff. So, but this is right here. This is for us this is for me and Fee to travel, to do these reports, to do whatever we can, to throw a few bucks to some of our people who are helping out. If we need videos cut or whatever the case may be, this is the fund to help us out. So just go to givesendgo.com/election integrity matters. We have a lot of elections that we want to cover this year, and it's very important because the election is not just about a certain party winning. A lot of times it's these countries fighting for their national sovereignty. And almost every single country we go to, the United States has their puppet, their choice, their people that they want to put in place, right? And they control the propaganda. So we like to document all this stuff and find out what's going on and hear directly from the people and bring it to you. So I put some of the links in the chat. If you want to help out, givesendgo.com/election integrity matters. You guys showed a lot of love for Fee's birthday. It was awesome the other day. If you can show some love now, please do so. If not, that share button in the middle, at least share it. Get it out there as much as we can. And we want to thank you all for joining today on this long show. Professor Danny Shaw, Fiorella Isabel, Jayme CheeseSlice on the ones and twos. I'm Craig Pasta Jardula. Fam, any final words before we get on out of here?
No, that's it, everybody. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you, fam, for bringing such an amazing perspective on Venezuela today, right? I mean, somebody did put in the chat, and I want to also just address this too as well, because we did have, as we get out of here, we did have Uncontrolled Opposition, the show I produce that goes on Pasta to Go, and it's also on WBAI Radio. And what's the independent radio channel, the internet radio station called again, Jayme? The one that Gary Knoll controls?
Progressive Radio Network.
The Progressive Radio Network. It goes over there too. Scott Ritter was on with them yesterday, and we did kind of ask that question about who's pulling the strings, Israel or United States, and you'd be interested to hear his answer, because at first he said Israel, but then as he had to rethink it and say it, he kind of explained it's a cabal that uses Israel and the Zionism to give themselves more power here at home. War is a racket shows. This is not just about, because somebody put down, and I started, America is Israel's puppet. I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it that way at all. I look at it, these people in America using Israel, using Zionism to further power themselves and enrich themselves. And I think that the fact that, we've said this before, that the ruling class only allows us to see what they want us to see. I think they'd be very happy if we all just blame the fact that Israel's the problem, like Fam had said before, almost as if America is the victim here and taken hostage. And if we can clean that problem up and fix that problem over there, everything else will get back into place. I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way at all. I know there are forces there, and there's so many people who make money outside of Israel, Western oligarchs that make a shit ton of money. You know, like I said, it's not just the bombs that are dropped in the contracts from Northrop Grumman and Raytheon, excuse me. You got to feed soldiers. You got to move them around. You got to house them. You got to do all that stuff. There's all this money to be made. And it's pointed out in Smedley Butler's book. So this is a cabal, not just Israel itself. Don't get hung up on that. This is a cabal. And they're all working together on this to make a ton of money and enslave humanity.
Yep. All right. That's it, guys. I got to go.
That's it, guys. We're out of here. We'll see you. We'll see you again soon. Thank you, CheeseSlice on the 1s and 2s. And to all the producers out there in the chats, we love you. Truth time. It's truth out. We'll see you on Monday.